Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. I've held on to this secret for a long time. It happened back in '92 when I was 18, and honestly, I still don't know what to make of it. I'm sharing this now because I need to tell someone who might actually believe me. My family thinks I'm crazy, and I've stopped bringing it up with friends because of the looks they give me. It was late July or early August, one of those brutally hot summer days in North Carolina, where the air feels like you're breathing through a wet towel. I was supposed to be working my shift at Golden Dragon, this Chinese restaurant where I'd been bussing tables and washing dishes for about 6 months. The owner, Mr. Chen, was a decent guy but worked us hard, and that day I just couldn't face another 8-hour shift in that steaming kitchen for minimum wage. So I called in sick, said I had food poisoning or something. I remember feeling guilty about it for about 5 minutes before the freedom of having an unexpected day off took over. I was 18, restless, and had my dad's old Chevy pickup to myself for the day. What else was I going to do? I decided to drive out to this place called River Run. It wasn't really anything special, just an abandoned venue that used to host concerts and festivals back in the 70s and 80s before it went out of business. There were a few dilapidated buildings, an old stage area, and it was right on the Yadkin River. Local kids used it as a place to drink beer and mess around, but on weekdays it was usually deserted. I parked in the overgrown lot and just wandered around for a while. The heat was intense, even in the shade of the pine trees that had started reclaiming the property. I remember my t-shirt sticking to my back, and I kept having to wipe sweat from my eyes. I had a Walkman with me. I think I was listening to Pearl Jam or Nirvana, something that had just come out that summer. After exploring the main building, which was mostly just empty rooms with graffiti and beer cans scattered around, I decided to head down to the river. There was this dirt path that wound through some trees for about 150 yards before it opened up to the riverbank. I remember the sound of my sneakers crunching on the dried pine needles and thinking how quiet it was out there. The only other sounds were cicadas and the distant rush of the river. As I got closer to the river, I started to make out a figure sitting on the bank. At first, I assumed it was just some homeless person. We had a few who lived out in these woods, mostly harmless guys who kept to themselves. From where I was, I could see what looked like really long hair, like seriously long, past their shoulders. They had this kind of hippie vibe going on, and I could only see them from about chest up because of how the riverbank sloped down. I kept walking, trying to look confident like I belonged there. You know how it is when you're alone and encounter a stranger. You don't want to look scared or uncertain. I figured I'd just nod and keep my distance, maybe find another spot further down the river to hang out. But then something happened that I still can't explain properly. About 50 yards away from this figure, I got this feeling. It wasn't exactly fear, more like my brain suddenly woke up and started processing what my eyes were seeing differently. The proportions were wrong. The shoulders were too broad, the head shaped oddly, and the hair, what I thought was hair, covered more of the body than would make sense for a person. With absolute clarity that hit me like a punch to the gut, I realized I wasn't looking at a human being. I froze mid-step. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. What I was looking at, sitting there so casually on the riverbank, was what I can only describe as a Bigfoot. I know how that sounds, believe me. If someone told me this story, I'd think they were full of shit or hallucinating. But I was stone cold sober, in broad daylight, and what I saw was real. The creature had this beautiful coat of hair, not black like you see in those blurry photos, but this rich, soup brown color that caught the sunlight. And it was just sitting there, like it was enjoying the day, looking out at the river. Here's the really weird part. I didn't run. Any sane person would have turned and sprinted back to their truck, but something about seeing this impossible thing made me curious in a way that overrode my fear. I actually took a few steps closer. I wanted to see it better, to confirm what I was seeing wasn't some bizarre trick of light or my imagination. I got to about 30 yards away when I glanced down for a second to make sure I wasn't going to trip over anything. It couldn't have been more than a second or two that I looked away. When I looked back up, it was gone. Just gone. That's when the panic hit me. My muscles locked up completely. I stood there, frozen, scanning the trees and riverbank. Where could something that big hide so quickly? I hadn't heard a splash, so it didn't go into the river. There was no sound of branches breaking or undergrowth being disturbed, which would have been unavoidable if it had run into the woods. It felt like I stood there for hours, though it was probably only minutes. My mind was racing through possibilities. Was I going crazy? Did I imagine it? But no, I had seen it clear as day. I hadn't been drinking or doing drugs. I wasn't tired or dehydrated enough to hallucinate. Eventually, my curiosity again overcame my fear. I had to know if what I saw was real. I carefully approached the spot on the riverbank where it had been sitting. My legs felt like jelly, and every noise from the woods made me jump. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting the creature to reappear behind me. When I reached the spot, I searched for evidence, hair, footprints, anything, but there was nothing obvious. The ground was too hard and rocky for footprints. I tried to estimate its height based on where it had been sitting. The riverbank dropped about 8 feet down to the water, and given how much of the creature was visible above the edge, it must have been at least 9 feet tall. Maybe 9'3" or 9'5". That's not something you can explain away as a guy in a costume. Another thing that struck me was the lack of smell. I've heard stories about Bigfoot having this terrible odor, but I didn't notice anything like that. Maybe the river washed away any scent, or maybe those stories are wrong. I spent maybe another hour searching the area, looking for any sign of what I'd seen. Nothing. Eventually, the reality of being alone in the woods, possibly with a 9-foot-tall unknown creature somewhere nearby, became too much. I made my way back to my truck, walking backwards half the time, scanning constantly for any movement. The drive home is a blur in my memory. I remember gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white and checking the rearview mirror obsessively. When I got home, I went straight to my room and tried to draw what I'd seen while it was still fresh in my mind. I still have that drawing tucked away in a folder. For weeks afterward, I couldn't sleep properly. I kept replaying the encounter, questioning my sanity, wondering if I should tell anyone. I tried telling my older brother, but he laughed it off and said I was watching too many episodes of unsolved mysteries. My parents would have been even less receptive, so I kept it to myself. I went back to River Run several times over the next few months, always with a camera, hoping to see it again and get proof. But I never did. Life moved on. I started community college that fall, got a different job, eventually moved away from that town altogether. But I've never forgotten what I saw. It's been over 30 years now, and I still think about that day. What was it doing there? Was it as surprised to see me as I was to see it? Where did it go when it disappeared? These questions still keep me up sometimes. The encounter changed me in ways I'm still understanding. Before that day, I had a pretty straightforward view of the world. What exists is what science has documented and explained. After seeing something that supposedly doesn't exist with my own eyes, I've become more open to possibilities beyond our current understanding. I've read books, joined online forums, even attended a couple of Bigfoot conferences. Discreetly, I'm not ready to be known as that Bigfoot guy among my colleagues. The more I've learned, the more I believe what I saw was real. There are too many similar accounts from credible people across too many different regions for all of them to be hoaxes or misidentifications. That's my story. I don't have proof. I don't have answers. All I have is the absolute certainty of what I saw on that hot summer day by the Yadkin River. It was real, it was there, and then it wasn't. And it's changed how I see the world ever since. Story 2. I've been trying to make sense of what happened to me for years now. I never believed in this stuff before, but after what I experienced in the woods around Center Star in Lauderdale County, Alabama, I can't explain it any other way. I've kept most of this to myself because I know how it sounds, but I need to get this off my chest. Back in 2011 and 2012, I was working as a newspaper delivery guy in northern Alabama. Not the most glamorous job, but it paid the bills. My route took me through some really remote areas, heavily wooded spots that border the Tennessee River. Center Star is basically surrounded by dense forest with all these little creeks running through it. Perfect habitat for wildlife, deer, turkey, the usual stuff. Or at least that's what I thought was out there. It started in March of 2011. I remember the date because it was right after my birthday. I was on my route around 7 in the morning, driving down Road 33. The sun was just coming up, and I was half asleep, running on autopilot like usual. That's when I saw this huge herd of deer, I mean at least 20 of them, sprinting across the road like their lives depended on it. Now, I've seen plenty of deer in my time, but something about this was different. They weren't just running, they were in full-on panic mode. Jumping fences, crashing through underbrush, completely terrified. My first thought was maybe a hunter or someone's dog was chasing them, but it was way too early in the year for hunting season. I pulled over, curious about what could have spooked them so badly. That's when I noticed how weird everything felt. The woods were completely silent. No birds, no insects, nothing. Anyone who spent time in the country knows that silence in the woods isn't natural. Something was off. I got out of my car and walked to the edge of the tree line. The hair on my arms stood up immediately. It felt like someone was watching me. I noticed some trees about 50 yards in were shaking, but there wasn't any wind. Not even a breeze. Just these trees moving like something big was pushing against them. There was a cattle field nearby, and those cows were all bunched up at the far end, as far from the woods as they could get. Animals know when something's not right. I got back in my car pretty quick and finished my route, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong in those woods. I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was probably just a coyote or something normal, but deep down I knew better. The next morning is when things got really freaky. It was around 5 a.m., still completely dark out. I was on Road 411 near the sailing club, another super isolated spot. I'd been driving for hours and really needed to take a leak, so I pulled over where there weren't any houses around. I got out and walked a few feet, toward the woods to do my business. I was standing there facing the tree line when I heard it, this growl, but not like a dog or a coyote. It was deeper, more guttural. Then it turned into this scream that made my blood run cold. It came from maybe 20 yards into the woods. Close, too close. I've heard bobcats, coyotes, all sorts of animals. This wasn't like any of them. It was almost human, but not quite. Like something trying to sound human, but not getting it quite right. I didn't even finish peeing. I just zipped up and ran back to my car. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. For the next couple days, I took a different route. I know that sounds stupid, but I was legitimately scared. Eventually, though, I had to go back to my normal route. My boss would have noticed if I kept taking the long way around. About a week later, I was on the same stretch of road, around 3 in the morning. I was driving slow, still nervous about what had happened. That's when my headlights caught something crossing the road about 100 feet ahead of me. All I could see was the eye shine. 2 reflective eyes about 6 feet off the ground. Whatever it was moved into the woods before I got close enough to see it clearly. But those eyes were way too high up to be a deer or anything normal around here. The next day, I heard from one of my customers that something had trampled through their garden, not just walked through it. completely destroyed it. Snapped bean poles, crushed plants. They blamed it on teenagers, but what teenagers are wreaking havoc in gardens at 4 in the morning? After that, I started paying more attention to that area. I even began to map out where these weird things were happening. There was this specific stretch of woods between Center Star and the river that just felt wrong. I started calling it the Bigfoot Woods in my head, even though I still wasn't sure I believed in that kind of thing. I started bringing a flashlight with a stronger beam. I'd shine it into the woods as I drove past the spots where I'd had weird experiences. Sometimes I'd see branches moving when there was no wind. Once or twice I thought I saw something large duck behind a tree, but it was always just at the edge of my vision, nothing I could confirm for sure. Then came the night in late August that I'll never forget as long as I live. It was about 3 a.m., pitch black, and I was on this isolated stretch of road between two farms. No houses for at least a mile in either direction, just fields on one side and dense woods on the other. I had my window down because it was still hot, even in the middle of the night. That's when I heard it. This bizarre combination of sounds that makes no sense even now as I try to describe it. It started with something like a bark, but then mixed with what sounded like an owl hoot, followed by this chattering noise like a monkey might make, all blended together in this pattern that felt almost like communication. The sounds were coming from just inside the forest across the road, not more than 30 feet from my car. And the worst part was, I could tell it wasn't just one thing making these noises. There were responses coming from different directions, like they were talking to each other. I hit the gas hard and got out of there. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I was absolutely convinced that whatever was making those sounds had been watching me, that they knew my routine, that they'd been tracking me. I'm not ashamed to admit I was terrified, but I was also weirdly fascinated. I'd heard stories about Bigfoot sightings in the southeast, but I'd always written them off as people seeing bears or just making stuff up. Now, I wasn't so sure. I started researching, reading about other sightings in Alabama and Tennessee, learning about behaviors that people associated with these creatures. And a lot of it lined up with what I was experiencing. The weird vocalizations, the feeling of being watched, animals acting strange, the height of those eyes I saw. I even got brave enough to start parking sometimes in those areas, turning off my car and just listening. A couple times I played Bigfoot calls from recordings I found online through my car speakers. I never got any clear responses, but sometimes there would be this tension in the air afterward, like the whole forest was holding its breath. Once, I left some apples at the edge of the woods where I'd heard those sounds. When I came back the next night, they were gone. Could have been anything, deer, raccoons, but in my gut, I felt it was something else. The strangest part of all this is how it just seemed to stop. After about 6 months of these experiences, things went quiet. I'd occasionally hear screams in the distance that made my skin crawl, but no more close encounters. It was almost like whatever was out there got used to me or lost interest. I still delivered papers on that route until I moved away in 2013. Every night, I'd drive past those spots with a mix of fear and hope, scared of what might be there, but also weirdly hoping to see something that would confirm I wasn't crazy. I've told this story to exactly 3 people in my life. 2 of them laughed it off. The third one, an old-timer who'd lived in the area his whole life, just nodded slowly and said, "The woods around here got secrets they don't share with everybody." I don't know what was in those woods in Lauderdale County. I can't prove anything. I don't have photos or footprints or hair samples. All I have is what I experienced, the sounds I heard, the eyes I saw, and that bone-deep certainty that something was watching me from just beyond the trees. Sometimes I still dream about those woods. In my dreams, I'm always driving that lonely road, and I always see something step out from between the trees, but I always wake up right before I can make out what it is. I'm not asking anyone to believe me. I know how it sounds, but I know what I experienced. And if you ever find yourself on those back roads of northern Alabama in the middle of the night, keep your windows up and your eyes on the road. And if you hear something that sounds like a bark mixed with an owl hoot, don't stop to investigate. Just drive. Story 3. I've been debating whether to post this for nearly 3 years now. I'm not the type to make up stories or seek attention, but what happened that night in October 2020 has been eating at me, and I need to get it off my chest. Maybe someone here has seen something similar or can explain what the hell my mom and I witnessed. For context, my mom has a small property near Packwood, Washington, right on the edge of some dense forest, not far from Mount Rainier National Park. It's pretty isolated, just a handful of neighbors scattered around, mostly within shouting distance, but not exactly next door. I've spent most of my life exploring those woods, hunting, tracking, and camping. I know the local wildlife better than most, which is why what happened that night still doesn't make any sense to me. It was around 9 in the evening, one of those perfect October nights. Crisp air, clear sky with a nearly full moon, and that fall smell that's impossible to describe, but instantly recognizable. Mom and I were sitting on the porch swing, just talking about nothing important. My dog Moose, a black lab mix who's about 70 pounds and usually fearless, was doing his normal evening patrol of the yard. The background noise was typical for that time of year. Some distant cows from the property down the road, a neighbor's dog barking maybe half a mile away, and the usual forest sounds. I remember checking my phone when it happened. It was exactly 9:12 p.m. when Moose suddenly stopped dead in his tracks near the edge of the yard. At first, I thought he'd spotted a deer or maybe a coyote, not uncommon out there, but something about his posture set off alarm bells in my head. He wasn't excited or alert like he gets with deer. He was frozen completely still, ears straight up, tail low but not tucked, and his entire body focused toward the ridge across the road. "What's he looking at?" Mom asked, and I just shrugged, but I was already feeling uneasy. Moose stayed like that for what must have been 3 or 4 minutes, not moving a muscle, just staring. Then it happened. From the direction of the ridge came this sound. I've spent my whole life outdoors. I've heard coyotes, wolves, cougars, bears, elk, you name it. This wasn't any of those. It started as this deep guttural howl, but then it rose into something else entirely. It's hard to describe, but imagine a wolf howl that keeps going up in pitch until it becomes this vibrating, almost roaring scream that echoed through the trees. It lasted maybe 15 seconds, and I swear I felt it in my chest more than heard it. Before it even finished, another similar call answered from much further away, maybe a mile or more to the north. The hair on my arms stood straight up. Mom grabbed my wrist hard enough to leave marks. Then the forest went completely, utterly silent. No insects, no distant cows, nothing. Just this heavy silence that felt wrong. "What the hell was that?" Mom whispered. I didn't answer because I honestly had no idea. I've never heard anything like it before or since. After about 5 minutes of this eerie silence, I decided to try something. I've got a predator call I use for hunting that can mimic coyotes pretty well. I gave it a short blast, expecting to get some response from the local coyote population. Nothing. Not a single answer. Just more silence. That's when Moose started growling, not his normal alert bark when he sees a raccoon or something, but this deep, continuous growl that I'd only heard from him once before, when a black bear wandered too close to the house. His hackles were up, and he was staring intently at the tree line at the far end of our property, maybe 100 yards from the porch. I followed his gaze, and that's when I saw it. At first, it was just movement. Something large stepping out from between the trees at the edge of our property. As it moved into a clearing where the moonlight hit better, I could make out its shape, and my brain just couldn't process what I was seeing. This thing was massive. I'm 6'2", and this was way bigger, at least 8 feet tall, maybe more. Its shoulders were impossibly wide, like a door frame. It was covered in what looked like dark, matted hair or fur. The proportions were all wrong, arms too long, swinging almost to its knees as it moved. Its head seemed to sit low between its shoulders, almost like it didn't have much of a neck. It moved with this deliberate, purposeful stride across the far edge of our yard, just beyond where our porch light reached. I couldn't make out facial features, but at one point it turned slightly toward us, and I swear I caught the dull amber reflection of its eyes in the moonlight. Moose, who would chase bears and isn't afraid of anything, backed up until he was pressed against my legs, still making that deep growling sound, but not daring to bark. The figure disappeared behind our tool shed, and for a second I thought about grabbing my rifle from inside, but I couldn't move. It wasn't exactly fear, though I was definitely scared. It was more like my brain just couldn't compute what was happening. "Did you see that?" Mum finally whispered. Her face had gone completely pale, and she was squeezing my arm so hard it hurt. I nodded. "Yeah, I saw it." Just saying it out loud made it real in a way that terrified me. We'd both seen something that shouldn't exist. We hurried inside, locking the door behind us. Moose stayed practically glued to us all night, which was completely out of character for him. He usually sleeps at the foot of my bed, but that night he kept pacing between my room and my mom's, checking the windows and making these quiet whining sounds. I didn't sleep at all, just sat there with my shotgun across my lap, listening to the absolute silence outside. No crickets, no owls, nothing. Around 3 in the morning we heard it again, that same howl scream, but much further away this time, maybe from the next ridge over. It was answered by 2 others from different directions, then silence again. When morning finally came, I waited until full daylight before going outside to look around. The area near the shed where the thing had walked had flattened grass, and a plastic chair we kept out there had been knocked over. That was it. No footprints, no hair, nothing I could point to and say, "See, this proves what we saw." I called my buddy who works for the Forestry Service later that day. I didn't tell him exactly what we saw, just asked if there had been any unusual animal sightings in the area. He got quiet for a minute, then said, "You see something out by your mum's place?" When I hesitated, he said, "You wouldn't be the first. That area has a history. My advice, don't go looking for whatever it was." That was it. He wouldn't elaborate, and I didn't push it. We stayed at the property for 3 more days, and nothing else happened. Though Moose refused to go out alone after dark, he'd do his business right by the porch steps and hurry back inside. I've spent most of my life in those woods. I know what bears look like, even standing. I know what cougars look like. This wasn't either of those. The size alone rules them out, not to mention the way it moved, almost like a person, but not quite. And that sound, I've never heard anything even remotely similar from any known animal. I've gone back to the property dozens of times since then, and I've never seen or heard anything like it again. But I don't go out after dark anymore, and I don't let Moose roam the yard at night either. My mom refuses to stay there alone now. I've tried researching similar sightings in the area and found a few vague reports, but nothing concrete. Part of me wants answers, but a bigger part is afraid of what those answers might be. All I know is that whatever we saw that night was real. It was massive, and it wasn't something that's supposed to exist in those woods or anywhere else. I'm not claiming it was a Bigfoot or anything specific. I'm just sharing what I saw with my own eyes. Whatever it was, it moved with intelligence and purpose, and those howls were clearly communication between multiple creatures. That's what keeps me up at night. Not just that we saw one of these things, but that there are more of them out there in those woods. Sometimes when I'm lying in bed at night, I can still hear that howl in my head, and I wonder if it's out there right now, looking at someone else's house from the edge of the trees. Story 4. I've never been the type to believe in monsters. Growing up in Northern California, I'd heard all the Bigfoot stories, seen the grainy footage, and laughed along with everyone else at the idea of some giant ape man wandering around our forests. My wife Clara felt the same way. We were practical people. I worked in insurance. She taught third grade. We dealt in facts, not fairy tales. That changed on August 18th, 2004. It was a Wednesday, and we'd taken a rare midweek day off together. The summer had been hectic with Clara's summer school schedule and my work, so we hadn't spent much quality time together. We decided to pack a simple picnic dinner and head to Jedediah Smith Redwood State Park, about an hour from our home. It's a beautiful place. Ancient redwoods towering overhead, dappled sunlight breaking through the canopy, that earthy smell of soil and pine that just makes you feel alive. We brought along our golden retriever, Samson, who was always happiest when exploring outdoors. We arrived around 6 in the evening, found a quiet picnic table away from the handful of other visitors, and unpacked our meal. Nothing fancy. Some sandwiches, pasta salad, chips, and a thermos of iced tea. The temperature was perfect, probably in the low 70s, with a gentle breeze rustling through the trees. As we finished eating around 7, the park had mostly emptied out. There was an older couple at a table about 100 yards away, and we could hear children playing somewhere near the visitor center, but otherwise, it felt like we had the place to ourselves. Clara suggested we take Samson for a quick walk on one of the smaller trails before heading home. I agreed. The sun wouldn't set for another hour or so, giving us plenty of time for a short hike. We chose a trail that branched off from near our picnic area. It wasn't one of the main paths, more like a narrow walking trail that meandered into the woods. I remember checking the small trail marker. It was only about a half-mile loop, perfect for a brief evening stroll. Samson was excited, tugging at his leash as we stepped onto the path. We hadn't gone more than 15 feet into the woods when I first heard it. It was a howl, but not like anything I'd heard before. I've been hiking all my life and know what coyotes and wolves sound like. This was different, deeper, almost guttural, but with a higher-pitched end note that sent shivers down my spine. Clara stopped walking and gripped my arm. "What was that?" she whispered, her eyes scanning the trees. "Probably just a coyote," I said, though I didn't believe it myself. "Sounds a bit far off." Samson's behavior should have been our first warning. His ears were pinned back, and he was no longer pulling on the leash. Instead, he pressed against Clara's leg, his tail tucked between his legs. But we continued walking, convincing ourselves it was nothing unusual. The trail narrowed as we went deeper into the forest. The redwoods blocked more of the evening light, casting long shadows across our path. After walking for maybe 5 minutes, we heard the howl again. This time it seemed to come from our right, and it was definitely closer. What disturbed me most was how it seemed to be moving parallel to us, as if whatever was making the sound was following our progress through the woods. Clara squeezed my hand tighter. "Richard, I don't like this," she said quietly. I was about to suggest turning back when we heard the sound from our left side. That's when I realized there might be more than one of whatever was out there. Still, the rational part of my brain was working overtime to explain it away. Sound echoes strangely in forests. Animals often travel in packs. Nothing unusual about that. We'd gone about 75 yards down the trail when we reached a small clearing. The trees opened up slightly, allowing the evening light to filter through more clearly. That's when we both stopped dead in our tracks. The howling came again, but this time it was followed by the distinct sound of breaking branches. Something large was moving through the underbrush. Samson began to whimper, a sound I'd never heard him make before. He was trembling against Clara's leg, his eyes fixed on a dense stand of trees about 30 yards to our right. I followed his gaze and felt my heart skip several beats. Standing partially hidden between 2 massive redwoods was something. At first, my brain tried to process it as a bear standing on its hind legs. But bears don't stand that tall. This thing was massive, easily 7 or 8 feet in height. And bears don't stand so deliberately, so human-like. It was covered in dark hair, not black, but a deep dark brown that almost blended with the shadows of the forest. Its shoulders were broad, its arms longer than a human's should be. But what froze me in place were its eyes. Even from that distance, I could see them clearly. They reflected the fading sunlight with an amber glow, and they were fixed directly on us. For what felt like an eternity, but was probably only about 10 seconds, we stared at each other. None of us moved. Not me, not Clara, not Samson, and not this creature. It was as if time itself had stopped in that forest clearing. I remember noticing absurd details, the way a bird was chirping somewhere above us, completely oblivious to the tension below, the feeling of sweat beading on my forehead despite the cool evening air, the slight tremor in Clara's hand as she gripped mine. Then it moved. God help me. It turned sideways and began to walk away, deeper into the forest. It didn't drop to all fours like a bear would. It walked upright on 2 legs, with a gait that was unsettlingly human-like, yet not quite right, too fluid, too silent for something so large. Its arms swung slightly at its sides, and its head remained turned toward us until it disappeared behind the massive trunk of a redwood. "Richard," Clara's voice was barely audible, "we need to go. Now." I didn't argue. We turned and began walking quickly back the way we came. I didn't want to run. Something primal inside me warned against triggering a chase response. Samson needed no encouragement, practically pulling us back toward the trailhead. We hadn't gone 20 yards when we heard movement in the forest to our right, something keeping pace with us, just out of sight. Branches cracked, undergrowth rustled. The howl came again, answered by another from somewhere behind us. "Don't run," I whispered to Clara, though every instinct was screaming at me to do just that. "Just keep walking quickly." The shadows were growing longer as the sun sank lower, and the forest seemed to close in around us. The trail that had seemed so pleasant just minutes before now felt like a tunnel through hostile territory. I kept my eyes forward, focusing on the path ahead while straining my ears to track the movement beside us. Whatever was following us stayed just out of sight. Occasionally, I caught glimpses of dark movement between trees, but never a clear view like we'd had in the clearing. The howling continued intermittently, each call sending fresh waves of adrenaline through my system. After what felt like hours, but couldn't have been more than a few minutes, we reached the edge of the forest, where the trail opened back up to the picnic area. Our table was just as we'd left it, our cooler and remaining food items still laid out. I've never been so relieved to see a plastic tablecloth in my life. "Let's grab our stuff and go," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We quickly began gathering our belongings, shoving items haphazardly into our cooler and bags. That's when we heard it again, that same howl, but much closer now. It seemed to come from just within the tree line, not 50 feet from where we stood. Clara dropped a container of pasta salad, not even bothering to pick it up. Samson was barking now, facing the forest with his hackles raised. I grabbed the cooler in one hand and Clara's arm with the other. "The car," I said. "Now!" We practically ran across the picnic area to the parking lot, not looking back. Our Honda was the only vehicle left in the small lot. I fumbled with the keys, finally getting the doors unlocked. We threw our stuff in the back and Clara pulled Samson into the back seat. I jumped in the driver's seat, started the engine, and peeled out of the parking space. As we drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. I swear I saw movement at the edge of the forest. Something large, stepping partially out from between the trees, then retreating back into the shadows as our headlights illuminated the area. We drove home in near silence, both of us processing what we'd seen. When we finally spoke about it that night, we agreed on the details, the height, the dark hair, the human-like gait, those eyes. We also agreed that we wouldn't tell many people, Who would believe us? We'd be labeled as attention seekers, or worse, crazy. It's been years now, and I still can't explain what we encountered that evening. I've researched similar sightings in the area, read about Bigfoot and Sasquatch legends. Some accounts match eerily well with what we experienced, but I remain uncertain. All I know for sure is that something was in those woods that shouldn't have been there. Something that defied my understanding of the natural world. We haven't returned to Jedediah Smith Redwoods since that day. Samson would never go near forests again. He'd pull in the opposite direction if we even approached a heavily wooded area. He seemed to understand something that my human mind still struggles to accept, that there are things in this world that exist beyond our knowledge, beyond our comfortable explanations. I still wake up sometimes hearing that howl in my dreams. Clara says she does too, and whenever we drive past dense forests, especially as the sun is setting, we both fall silent, watching the shadows between the trees, wondering if something might be watching us back. Story 5. I've been sitting on this experience for years, almost 16 years to be exact. It happened in late August of 2007, and I've only recently started talking about it because I kept seeing similar accounts online. I need to get this off my chest, and I think this community might understand better than most. I'm a detective with the County Sheriff's Department, but back then I was just a rookie. My buddy Thomas and I had planned this hiking trip in the Quinault Indian Reservation in Western Washington for months. We're both outdoorsy guys, grew up camping, fishing, hunting. So we weren't exactly greenhorns in the wilderness. The Quinault has these gorgeous old-growth forests, and we wanted to explore the northeastern section, near Twin Lakes. That day started perfectly. Clear skies, about 70 degrees, just a slight breeze. Couldn't have asked for better hiking weather. We'd been on the trail since around 10 in the morning, taking our time, stopping for photos, having lunch by a stream. By late afternoon, maybe around 5, we were deep in this ancient forest with massive birch and fir trees towering over us. The sunlight barely filtered through the canopy, creating these dappled patterns on the ground. It was so quiet, you could hear pine needles dropping. I remember feeling at peace. You know that feeling when you're away from the city noise, from your phone, from all the bullshit of everyday life? That's where I was mentally, just soaking in the silence, breathing that clean forest air. Then everything changed. We were walking single file on this narrow trail. Thomas was maybe 10 feet ahead of me. About 50 feet in front of us, off to our right in the denser part of the forest, we heard it. A scream. But calling it a scream doesn't do it justice. It was... Christ, how do I even describe it? It was piercing, so loud it felt physical, like it was pushing against my chest. It was high-pitched but also deep, if that makes any sense, like something was channeling sound through a massive body. We both froze instantly. I literally could not move. It wasn't a conscious decision to stop walking. My body just locked up. Thomas looked back at me, and I'll never forget his face. His eyes were wide, mouth hanging open. I'm sure I looked the same. The scream didn't stop. Most animals or people, they scream and then need to breathe, right? This didn't pause. It continued unbroken for what had to be at least a full minute. No human could sustain that. No group of humans could coordinate to make it sound continuous like that. It wasn't a cougar or a bear or an elk. I've heard all those. This was something else entirely. While we stood there, paralyzed, the screaming continued. And then came the destruction. That's the only word for it. Destruction. From the direction of the scream, we heard cracking, snapping, violent movement. Something was breaking trees, not branches, entire trees. These weren't saplings either. These were mature birch trees with trunks as thick as my thigh. The sound of wood splintering echoed through the forest. It was like hearing bones break, but amplified 100 times. Whatever was causing this was incredibly powerful. I've seen storm damage, tornado aftermath. This sounded similar, but more deliberate, more focused, like something was systematically destroying everything in its path. Thomas whispered, "Run." Just that one word, and we did. We turned and sprinted northward along the trail, back the way we'd come. Our packs bounced painfully against our backs. I remember my lungs burning almost immediately, not from exertion, but from fear. Pure animal fear. As we ran, the thing, whatever it was, started moving too. It wasn't directly following our path, though. It seemed to be running parallel to us, up on a ridge to our right. I could hear trees shaking, branches snapping, undergrowth being crushed, and it kept screaming. Not constantly now, but in bursts, like it was calling to something, or hunting us. The most terrifying part was that it kept pace with us easily. We were running full tilt down a trail, and this thing was keeping up while crashing through dense forest. It followed us for what felt like forever, but was probably about 200 feet before the sounds gradually began to fade. I don't remember much about the rest of our escape, just running until our legs gave out, then walking as fast as we could, constantly looking over our shoulders. We didn't stop until we reached our car at the trailhead. We barely spoke the entire drive back to town. For days afterward, I had trouble sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that scream. I kept seeing shadows moving through the trees outside my window. Thomas and we kind of made an unspoken agreement not to talk about it. What would we even say? That we heard a monster in the woods, that something impossibly strong was destroying trees while screaming like nothing we'd ever heard before. We'd sound insane, so we buried it for years. We still hung out, still went fishing and camping, but never in that area again, never in any area that reminded us of that day. We chose open spaces, places with visibility, no more dense forests, no more hikes near sunset. About 5 years after it happened, I started seeing reports online about Bigfoot encounters in the Pacific Northwest. Normally I'd roll my eyes at that stuff, but some details caught my attention. People described screams that didn't sound human or animal. They talked about trees being broken, not just knocked down, but snapped. They mentioned feeling watched, pursued. I showed Thomas some of these accounts. It was the first time we'd acknowledged what happened since that day. He read them silently, then just looked at me and said, "That's what we heard, isn't it?" I nodded. We finally had a framework to understand our experience, even if we still couldn't fully explain it. Later, I was working a case that took me to the Quinault Reservation for interviews. After finishing my official business, I got talking with one of the tribal elders. Very carefully, I asked about the area around Twin Lakes, trying not to reveal too much about my experience. The elder got real quiet. He studied my face for a long time before saying that part of the reservation had always been avoided by their people, especially near dusk. He said there was something there that shouldn't be disturbed. When I pressed for details, he just shook his head and said some things were better left alone. That conversation chilled me more than any online Bigfoot report. These people had lived on this land for generations. They knew its secrets, its dangers, and they specifically avoided the exact area where Thomas and I had our encounter. I've tried to rationalize what happened that day. Maybe it was some kind of territorial display by a known animal. Maybe it was an elaborate prank, though who would be out there and how would they break those trees? Maybe it was some kind of mass hysteria or shared hallucination between Thomas and me, though that doesn't explain the physical evidence of destruction we both witnessed. But deep down, I know what it was. Something ancient, something powerful, something that doesn't want to be found, but occasionally makes its presence known. The scientific part of my brain still struggles with this. As a detective, I need evidence, facts, proof. I have none of that, just an experience that defies explanation and has haunted me for 16 years. Last month, Thomas and I finally went back, not to the exact spot. We couldn't bring ourselves to do that, but to a nearby area where we could see Twin Lakes from a distance. We sat there in silence for a long time, watching the sun sink lower, the shadows growing longer across the water. "Do you think it's still out there?" Thomas finally asked. I didn't answer right away. I was listening to the forest, to the wind in the trees, to the calls of birds gradually quieting as evening approached. "I think some things have always been out there," I said eventually, "and always will be." We left before dark. Some warnings you only need to hear once. I still dream about that scream sometimes. I wake up sweating, heart pounding, certain that something is right outside my window. In my worst moments, I imagine that whatever was in those woods somehow followed us home, that it's been watching us all these years, waiting. And in my darkest thoughts, I wonder if someday, when I least expect it, I'll hear that scream again, not in the wilderness, but right behind me. Story 6. I've been debating whether to write this down for years. It's been 25 years, and I still wake up in cold sweats sometimes. My sister Ashley and I have barely talked about what happened that night in '98, but I know she remembers it as vividly as I do. We both just decided it was better not to dwell on it. But I need to get this off my chest, and maybe someone here has experienced something similar. It was late June 1998. I was 23, and Ashley was 26 and 7 months pregnant with my nephew. We'd been at our mum's place in Culpeper County, Virginia for Sunday dinner, a tradition we'd kept up even after we'd both moved out. Mum lived in this old farmhouse that had been in our family for generations, surrounded by wheat fields and not much else. The dinner was normal. We ate pot roast, talked about Ashley's pregnancy, and listened to Mum fret about Y2K. Remember that whole panic? We left around 9:30. It was a clear night, warm but not humid like Virginia summers usually are. The sky was this deep navy blue with a million stars. No moon that night, which I remember thinking was pretty. I was driving my old Honda Civic, the one with the squeaky brakes and the tape deck that ate cassettes. We were about 4 miles from Mom's on County Road 615, just this narrow 2-lane road cutting through wheat fields. The windows were down because the AC in my car was busted, and we weren't playing any music, just talking about how Mum was still dating that guy from her church who wore socks with sandals. We rounded this curve in the road. I remember it perfectly because there's this big oak tree that marks it, and that's when I first saw it. About 50 meters ahead, this figure, standing at the edge of the field. At first, I thought it was just a person, maybe a farmer checking their crops at night, which would have been weird, but whatever. But as we got closer, I realized how big it was. Massive, taller than any person I've ever seen. I slowed down, not because I wanted a better look, but because my body just reacted that way, like when you see a deer on the road and you hit the brakes before your brain even processes what you're looking at. "What is that?" Ashley whispered, leaning forward in her seat. I couldn't answer. My throat felt like it was closing up. The thing was moving through the wheat, parallel to the road. The wheat came up to about mid-thigh on a normal person, but on this thing, it barely reached its knees. It was just gliding through the field, not running, not walking exactly, moving in this smooth way that didn't seem right. I slowed the car to maybe 5 miles per hour. The headlights weren't hitting it directly, but there was enough ambient light from the stars that we could make out its silhouette. It was dark, not black, but this deep charcoal color that seemed to absorb what little light there was. It had these impossibly long limbs, and its head, God, its head wasn't round like a person's. It was elongated, almost like it was wearing some kind of hood, but I knew instinctively it wasn't wearing anything. That was just its shape. The worst part? We couldn't hear a thing. The windows were down, the engine was practically idling, and there was no sound of wheat rustling, no footsteps, nothing. Just this terrible silence as it moved. Then it turned toward us. I didn't see a face. Thank God I didn't see a face, but I knew it was looking at us. I felt it. This wave of dread washed over me, like nothing I've ever felt before or since. It wasn't just fear. It was this bone-deep certainty that we weren't supposed to be seeing this, that we had stumbled into something ancient and wrong. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I couldn't breathe right. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, and I felt cold sweat breaking out all over my body. It was like my fight or flight response had gone into overdrive, but I couldn't do either. I was frozen. Ashley was leaning closer to the passenger window, staring at it. Her hand was protectively over her belly, but she couldn't look away. Her face was this awful pale color. "Stop looking at it," I said, but my voice came out as this pathetic croak. "Ashley, stop staring at it." She didn't respond. It was like she was in a trance. "Ashley!" I practically screamed, and that finally snapped her out of it. She jerked back in her seat, blinking rapidly. "Drive!" she whispered. "Olivia, drive!" I pressed the gas pedal harder than I meant to, and the car lurched forward. In my rearview mirror, I saw the thing stop moving. It just stood there, watching us go. I swear to God, even though we were getting farther away, it didn't seem to get any smaller in my mirror, like it was somehow maintaining the same size, regardless of distance. I know that sounds impossible, but that's what I saw. We drove in complete silence for maybe 30 seconds. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep the car straight on the road. Ashley was breathing in these quick, shallow pants. What was that?" she finally asked. "I don't know," I said. "A person? Someone playing a prank?" Even as I said it, I knew it was a lie. No human could move like that. No human could be that size. No human could make me feel that kind of primal terror just by looking in our direction. We rounded another bend in the road, not even half a mile from where we'd seen the thing, and that's when we saw them. 2 men, crouched in the bushes on either side of the road, one on the left, one on the right. They weren't hiding exactly, but they weren't just standing there either. They were waiting. They were wearing regular clothes, jeans, flannel shirts. They looked like locals, but something was off about them. Their posture was too stiff, too alert, and they were staring straight at our car with these blank expressions. I slowed down involuntarily again. "What the hell?" I muttered. As we got closer, a pickup truck appeared from the opposite direction. It was an old model, rusted around the edges, with those round headlights they don't make anymore. It slowed down right where the men were. One of the men stood up from his crouched position and took a step toward the road, toward us. That's when Ashley grabbed my arm so hard it left bruises. "Go," she said. "Go!" I floored it. The engine whined in protest, but the car shot forward. We blew past the men and the truck. In my rearview mirror, I saw one of the men standing in the middle of the road, watching us go. The truck had stopped. They were all just watching. I didn't slow down. I was doing 80 on a road marked for 45, taking the curves way too fast. Ashley was gripping the dashboard with one hand and her belly with the other. "What the fuck was that?" she kept saying. "What the fuck was that?" I couldn't answer. My mind was racing, trying to connect the thing in the field with the men by the road. Were they hunting it? Working with it? Had they even seen it? Was it all just some bizarre coincidence? No. No way it was a coincidence. I knew somehow that it was all connected. The thing had been there first, and then the men were waiting just down the road. Like they knew we'd be coming. Like they were expecting us after we saw the thing. We passed a little convenience store about 5 miles down the road. Mabel's, this old place that's been there forever. There was a police cruiser in the parking lot. I pulled in so fast I nearly hit the gas pump. Officer Jenkins was there, a guy who'd been with the county police since before we were born. He knew our family. I ran up to him, babbling about men hiding by the road, about a truck that had stopped, about feeling like we were in danger. He calmed me down, took some notes, asked if I'd been drinking. I hadn't. Said he'd drive out that way and check it out. I didn't tell him about the thing in the field. I couldn't. The words wouldn't come out. It was like my brain was protecting me from even talking about it. Or maybe I was afraid he wouldn't believe me. Or maybe, and this thought still chills me, maybe I was afraid that talking about it would somehow make it notice me again. Jenkins followed us home to make sure we got there safely. Ashley was silent the whole way. She just kept rubbing her belly in slow circles like she was reassuring my nephew that everything was okay. When we got home, we both acted like nothing had happened. We made tea. We watched some stupid sitcom rerun. We didn't talk about any of it. The next morning, I called Jenkins to see if he'd found anything. He said he'd driven up and down that stretch of road 3 times and hadn't seen anyone suspicious. No men in the bushes, no pickup truck, nothing unusual at all. Over the next few weeks, I drove by that spot in the daylight multiple times. I don't know what I was looking for. Footprints? Broken wheat stalks? Some evidence that what we saw was real? I never found anything. Ashley gave birth to my nephew in August. Healthy baby boy. But I noticed she wouldn't drive that road to Mom's anymore. She'd take the long way around, adding 20 minutes to the trip. She never said why, and I never asked. We both knew. We've barely talked about that night since. Maybe 3 times in 25 years, always after a few drinks, always in these vague terms. That weird thing on the way home from Mom's that time, that scary night in the car. Never directly acknowledging what we saw, but sometimes I'll catch her looking at my nephew, a grown man now, with this strange protective expression. Like she's still afraid something might come for him. I still live in Culpeper County. I still drive that road sometimes, always in daylight, always with my doors locked and windows up. I've never seen anything like that again, but I avoid it at night, always. I don't know what we saw that night. Some kind of cryptid, an alien, a ghost, or something else entirely. Something that doesn't fit into any category we have. I don't know if those men were working with it somehow, or hunting it, or if they were just as scared and confused as we were. All I know is that for a few minutes on a clear June night in 1998, my sister and I saw something that shouldn't exist, and whatever it was, it saw us too. Sometimes I wake up at night sweating, convinced that it's still out there in those wheat fields, waiting, watching. And sometimes, in my worst moments, I wonder if it's been watching me ever since. Story 7. I've never told this story publicly. Most of my friends have no idea, and my husband only heard about it after we'd been married for years. But I swear every word is true. After all this time, I still get goosebumps when I think about it. This happened in the summer of 1982. I was 13, and my family had just moved into our newly built home near the Cascade Mountains in Washington state. My dad had designed the house himself, a rustic place with lots of wood and big windows that looked out into miles of forest. Our backyard literally ended where the wilderness began. I was a shy kid, and the move had been hard on me. I'd left all my friends behind, and school wouldn't start for another month. My only companions were Butterscotch, my pony, and Rex, our black lab. I spent most days exploring the woods behind our house. My parents were okay with it as long as I didn't go too far and was home before dinner. The forest had all these old game trails that deer used, and there was this cold creek that cut through the property and eventually led to some swampy lowlands. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late July. I remember because my mum was making tacos for dinner, which she always did on Tuesdays. The day was weirdly hot and still. I decided to take Butterscotch and Rex for a walk along this ridge trail that ran behind our house. I'd been down it a few times before and knew it pretty well. It gave a nice view of the valley and the mountains beyond. I was leading Butterscotch by her halter, and Rex was trotting ahead, occasionally stopping to sniff at something interesting. We'd been walking for maybe 20 minutes when I noticed how quiet everything had gotten. I mean, completely silent. No wind rustling the leaves, no birds chirping, no squirrels scampering around. Nothing. Even the usual buzzing of insects had stopped. At first, I didn't think much of it, but then Rex stopped exploring and came back to walk right by my side. which was unusual for him. Butterscotch seemed a bit more skittish too, though she wasn't pulling away or anything. I remember feeling this weird pressure in the air, like right before a thunderstorm, but the sky was clear blue without a single cloud. That's when I looked up the hill to my right, and there it was. About 40 yards away, partially hidden behind some brush and tree limbs, stood something I still can't fully explain. It was massive, standing completely upright on two legs. The first thing I noticed was that it was covered entirely in dark brown hair, almost black in the shadows. Not fur exactly, more like long, matted hair. It was tall, taller than my dad, who was 6'2", maybe 7 feet or even more. Its shoulders were incredibly broad, and it had this heavy barrel chest. The arms were unnaturally long, hanging down past where its knees would be. The build reminded me of pictures I'd seen of gorillas, but this was definitely standing on two legs like a person. I couldn't see its face clearly. It was in shadow, and honestly, I didn't want to stare too hard. But I could feel it watching me, not moving, not making a sound, just watching. It was so still that if I hadn't been looking directly at it, I might have thought it was just a weird shadow or a tree stump. But it wasn't. It was something alive. The strangest part was how Rex and Butterscotch reacted, or rather, how they didn't react. Rex, who would bark his head off if a raccoon came near our trash cans, just stood there quietly. Butterscotch, who could get spooked by a plastic bag blowing in the wind, remained completely calm. It was like they didn't even see this enormous thing standing right there. I don't know how long we stood like that. Probably only seconds, but it felt like forever. I didn't scream. I didn't run. Some deep instinct told me that would be the worst thing to do. Instead, I slowly turned around and started walking back down the trail the way we came. I didn't look back. I just kept a steady pace, not too fast, not too slow, with Rex beside me and Butterscotch following obediently. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. My mouth was completely dry. I kept expecting to hear footsteps behind me or feel something grab me, but nothing happened. The silence continued all the way back until we got close to our house. Then suddenly, the forest sounds returned. Birds started singing, leaves rustled, and everything seemed normal again. When I got home, I put Butterscotch back in her paddock and went inside. Mom was in the kitchen making dinner, and Dad was watching the news. They asked how my walk was, and I just said, "Fine." I didn't tell them what I'd seen. I was 13. Who would believe a kid claiming she saw some giant hairy monster in the woods? They'd think I was making it up for attention or that I'd watched too many scary movies. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept my curtains closed tight and jumped at every little sound. For weeks afterward, I didn't go back into the woods alone. I stuck to the yard and the areas right around the house where I could still see our back porch. About a month later, I finally got the courage to tell my best friend Lisa when she came over to visit. She thought it was cool, but suggested maybe I'd seen a bear standing on its hind legs. I knew that wasn't it. I'd seen bears before on camping trips with my dad. This was something else entirely. Life went on. School started, I made new friends, and gradually the memory faded a bit. I still avoided that ridge trail, but I started exploring other parts of the woods again, always with Rex at my side. It was almost a year later when my mom mentioned something that made my blood run cold. We were having breakfast on the back deck, just the two of us, watching the mist rise from the creek. Out of nowhere, she said, "You know, last summer, right after we moved in, I saw something strange down by the creek." I froze with my orange juice halfway to my mouth. "What do you mean?" "It was probably nothing," she said. "But I was doing laundry and looking out the window. I saw something large and dark moving through the water. At first I thought it was a bear, but it was moving differently. Almost like a person, but not quite. It was far away and the light wasn't good, so I'm sure it was just a bear or maybe even a moose." But the way she said it, and the way she kept staring at the creek while she spoke, made me think she didn't believe it was a bear any more than I did. I finally told her what I'd seen on the ridge. She listened quietly, not interrupting. When I finished, she just nodded and said, "The Native Americans who lived in these mountains have all kinds of stories about forest beings. Maybe there are things out there we don't understand." That was it. We never really talked about it again, but sometimes I'd catch her staring out at the woods with a thoughtful expression. My dad built a fence around our yard the next spring. He said it was to keep deer out of Mom's garden, but it went all the way around the property, even the parts where there wasn't any garden. Over the years, I've read about Bigfoot sightings and similar creatures reported around the world. Some descriptions match what I saw, others don't. I'm not claiming I saw Bigfoot or anything specific. I just know I saw something that shouldn't exist, according to what we're taught about the natural world. I'm 44 now. My parents still live in that same house, though the area has changed a lot. The forest isn't as dense as it used to be. There are new homes built, where once there was only wilderness. The spot where I saw that creature is probably someone's fenced backyard now. I visited my parents last Christmas with my husband and kids. My 13-year-old daughter wanted to explore the woods like I used to, and I let her, though I made sure she stayed on the well-traveled paths near the house. My mum and I exchanged a look when she asked, but neither of us said anything. As far as I know, my parents haven't seen or heard anything strange since those early years. Maybe we were the first people to build in that area, and we disturbed something that had always been there. Maybe it moved deeper into the mountains as more people arrived. Or maybe what I saw that day was something completely unique, a single encounter that can never be explained. All I know is that sometimes when I'm hiking or camping and the woods go completely silent, I get that same feeling again. And I always look up the hill. Story 8. I still don't sleep well during harvest season. It's been over 50 years, but I can still smell that stench when the wind blows just right through my window at night. I've never shared this publicly before, but I need to get this off my chest. Maybe someone else has seen what I saw. This happened in the summer of 1970 when I was working as a park ranger in Clayton County, Iowa. I was 23, fresh out of college with a forestry degree, and thought I knew everything about the woods. The local department hired me to help patrol some of the state land around Elkada. It was mostly routine stuff, checking for campers in restricted areas, making sure people weren't littering, that kind of thing. August 14th was the day everything changed. I remember the date exactly because it was my mum's birthday, and I was supposed to call her that evening. The day started normal enough, hot and humid like Iowa gets in the summer. My supervisor asked me to check on some of the more remote fire roads since we hadn't had rain in weeks and were worried about fire hazards. Around 7:30 in the evening, the sun was starting to set, but there was still plenty of light. I was driving my department truck down this rarely used fire road about 8 miles outside of Elkada. It was a dirt path, really, cutting between cornfields on one side and a wooded area that sloped down to a ravine on the other. I had my window down, smoking a cigarette. Yes, we could do that back then, even on duty, enjoying the quiet. That's when I first heard it, a sound I still can't properly describe, like something between a deep moan and the creak of an old barn door, but louder, more deliberate. I pulled over and killed the engine, thinking maybe it was farm equipment in the distance or a cow in distress. But the sound came again, and I realized it was coming from the wooded area to my right. I grabbed my flashlight, even though it wasn't fully dark yet, and stepped out of the truck. Part of my job was checking on any unusual activity, and while I was a bit uneasy, I wasn't really scared. Not yet. I walked to the edge of the road where it dropped off toward the woods. The sound had stopped, but now I could hear something moving through the underbrush. Something big, really big. The brush was getting crushed like something was pushing through it. That's when the smell hit me. God, that smell. Like rotting meat mixed with wet fur and something else. something musky and wild and wrong. It was so strong I actually covered my nose with my shirt. I remember thinking it might be a dead deer or cow that had fallen into the ravine, and maybe some predator was feeding on it. I was about to call out, thinking it might be a hunter, though it wasn't hunting season, when I saw it. About 50 yards away, something stepped out from between the trees at the bottom of the slope. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. It was tall, impossibly tall. I'm 6'1", and this thing had to be at least 8 feet, maybe more. And it was white. Not like paper white, but a dirty, yellowish white, like old bones. For a second, I thought someone was playing a prank. Maybe some kids on stilts with a sheet or something. But then it moved, and no human moves like that. It was fluid, but powerful, like nothing I've ever seen before or since. The thing hadn't seen me yet. It was looking down at something on the ground. I couldn't see what. I was frozen in place, my hand still holding my useless flashlight. My brain kept trying to categorize what I was seeing. A bear? No. Some kind of deformed elk? Definitely not. Then it stood fully upright and turned its head toward the road, toward me. I couldn't see its face clearly in the fading light, but I could tell it had seen me. There was this moment, this horrible, stretched-out moment where we just stared at each other. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I was just paralyzed. Then it moved. Jesus Christ, it moved so fast. 1 second it was down by the trees, and the next it was charging up the embankment toward the road. Not like a person running, more like how an ape moves, but faster than anything that size should be able to move, using its arms as well as its legs, covering ground in these massive bounds. I stumbled backward, fell on my ass right there in the dirt. My flashlight went flying. I was scrambling, trying to get back to my feet, to get to my truck. All I could think was that I was about to die. The thing reached the road about 30 yards from where I was. That's when I got my clearest look at it. In the dying light, I could see it was covered in what looked like hair or fur, but patchy, with bare spots showing skin underneath. Its proportions were all wrong. Arms too long, legs too thick, and its face. I still have nightmares about that face. It wasn't quite human, wasn't quite animal. The eyes were set too far apart, and its mouth seemed too wide for its face, but it didn't come for me. Instead, it paused for just a second in the middle of the road, looked right at me again, and then bounded across to the other side. It moved with this terrible purpose, like it knew exactly where it was going. When it reached the cornfield, it didn't slow down. It just plowed into those 7-foot corn stalks and disappeared. I don't remember getting back to my truck. I just remember suddenly being inside it, fumbling with my keys, my hands shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. I peeled out of there, spraying dirt everywhere, not caring if I wrecked the county's truck. I just needed to get away. I drove straight back to the station. My supervisor was still there, finishing some paperwork. He took one look at me and knew something was wrong. I was pale and sweating and probably looked like I'd seen a ghost, which in a way I had. I tried to tell him what I'd seen, but the words sounded insane even to me. A giant white creature, running faster than a deer, disappearing into a cornfield. He thought I was pulling his leg at first, then he got concerned, asking if I'd been drinking on duty or if I was feeling ill. I insisted I was fine, that I'd seen something real. He eventually calmed me down and suggested I take the rest of the night off. I didn't argue. I went home and didn't sleep a wink that night. Every noise outside my window had me jumping. I kept seeing that thing's face when I closed my eyes. The next morning, I woke up hoping it had been some kind of weird hallucination. But I knew it wasn't. It was too real, too detailed. And that smell. I could still smell it on my clothes from the night before. I decided I needed to go back. In daylight. With a gun. I know that sounds crazy, but I had to know if there was any evidence of what I'd seen. I signed out a department rifle, told my supervisor I'd spotted what might be a rabid bear and wanted to check it out. He looked at me funny but didn't say no. Around noon, I drove back out to that same stretch of road. Everything looked different in the daylight. Normal, just woods and cornfields and blue sky. But as soon as I stepped out of the truck, I knew it hadn't been a dream. That smell was still there, fainter but unmistakable. I made my way carefully down the embankment to where I'd first seen the creature. The underbrush was crushed in a clear path, like something heavy had moved through it. And then I found the footprints. They were in a patch of soft earth near where the thing had stood. Massive prints, easily twice the size of my boot. They didn't look exactly human. The toes were wrong, more spread out, and there seemed to be claw marks at the tips, but they were definitely feet. Bipedal, walking upright. I took measurements and even tried to make a casting using some plaster of Paris I had in my truck. We used it sometimes to cast animal tracks for educational programs. But it didn't set right, came out all crumbly and useless. I spent about an hour searching the area, but didn't find much else. Just more broken branches and that lingering smell. When I crossed to check the cornfield, I found where it had entered, a path of broken stalks about 4 feet wide. I followed it for about 20 yards before the trail disappeared, like the thing had suddenly changed direction or, I don't know, vanished. Over the next few weeks, I became obsessed. I went to the local library and started researching. I asked around town, carefully at first because I didn't want people thinking I was crazy. That's when things got even weirder. Some of the older folks in El Cada knew exactly what I was talking about. Not all of them, but enough. One old farmer, must have been in his 80s, told me his grandfather used to talk about the white walker that lived in the hollows around Clayton County. Said it had been there for over 100 years. An elderly woman who ran the general store told me that back in 1922, something had killed 3 of her father's cows in a single night. They weren't just killed, they were torn apart, organs removed. The sheriff at the time blamed it on wolves, but her father swore no wolf could do that kind of damage. He'd found footprints, she said, human-like but massive. The more I asked, the more stories I heard, always in hushed tones, always with the same warning. Stay away from those back roads after dark, especially during harvest time when the corn is high. I requested never to work nights again. My supervisor didn't ask why, just rearranged the schedule. I carried that rifle with me on every patrol for months afterward, even though department policy was to only take firearms when responding to specific wildlife calls. I never saw the creature again, but sometimes when I was patrolling near that area, I'd catch a whiff of that smell, just for a second, just enough to make my heart race and my palms sweat. I left that job the following spring, moved to Minnesota, took a position with their parks department, told myself it was for the better pay, the advancement opportunities, but really I couldn't handle the fear anymore, the constant looking over my shoulder, the nightmares. To this day, I don't know what I saw in those woods. Wasn't a bear, wasn't a human in a costume. It moved too fast, was too big, and that smell, nothing natural smells like that. I still think about it. Wonder if it's still out there, moving through cornfields in the twilight. Wonder if anyone else has seen it. I've never gone back to Clayton County, and I never will. Some things are better left alone. But every year when harvest season comes around, I lock my doors a little tighter. And sometimes when the wind is just right, I swear I can still smell it, that musky, rotten smell that doesn't belong in this world. Story 9. I'm still shaking a bit as I type this. It's been a few days since it happened, but I can't get the image out of my head. I've never been more terrified in my life, and I need to tell someone who might understand or have experienced something similar. I'm 14, living on my family's dairy farm in Chenango County, just south of Bainbridge, New York. I've always loved exploring the woodlot on our property. Being in the Boy Scouts has taught me a lot about wilderness survival, and I'd set up my own little campsite next to a small spring deep in the woods. It's a perfect spot. fresh water, natural cover from the elements, and surrounded by beautiful oak, maple, cherry, and beech trees. I go there almost every day after chores, just to be alone and practice my scout skills. Last Tuesday, May 9th, 1961, I headed out to my spot around 1 in the afternoon. The day was warm but comfortable, with sunlight filtering through the leaves overhead. I remember the smell of the forest was especially strong that day, that earthy, green smell that comes after a light rain. I was about 50 yards from my campsite when I heard something rustling near the spring. My first thought was that it might be a deer. We see them all the time on our property, and I wanted to get a good look. I immediately crouched down and moved as quietly as possible through the underbrush, carefully placing each foot to avoid snapping twigs. I'd gotten pretty good at moving silently through the woods over the years. As I got closer, I could hear splashing at the spring. I grinned to myself, thinking I'd catch a nice buck drinking. I parted some branches to get a better view, and that's when everything changed. It wasn't a deer. What I saw made my blood run cold instantly. Standing at the spring, maybe 50 to 100 feet away from me, was something I can only describe as a coal-black figure. It was rising up from a crouched position by the water, and as it stood to its full height, it turned and looked directly at me. I'll never forget those eyes, bright, brilliant yellow, reflecting the dappled sunlight coming through the trees. They contrasted against its jet-black coat in a way that didn't seem natural or possible. This thing had the broadest shoulders I've ever seen on any living creature. There was virtually no neck. Its rounded head seemed to sit directly on those massive shoulders. The head was oddly human-like in shape, but that's where any resemblance to a human ended. The most disturbing part was that I couldn't make out any face. The entire front of its head was covered with long, dark hair that hung down like a curtain. Only those yellow eyes were visible, peering through the hair strands, staring directly at me. I couldn't see its lower half because of the thick brush between us, but its torso was enormous, far wider than any man I've ever seen. Standing at its full height, I'd guess it was around 6 feet tall, maybe a bit more. As we stared at each other, it swayed gently from side to side, almost like it was trying to get a better look at me without moving its feet. Time seemed to stop in that moment. I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe. My whole body felt ice cold despite the warm day. I remember thinking, this isn't possible, not here. See, I've read all the stories in True magazine, the articles by Ivan Sanderson about Jerry Crew, Ray Wallace, and John Green. I knew about Bigfoot sightings, but those were all in the Pacific Northwest. We don't have those kinds of creatures in upstate New York. At least, that's what I always thought. But standing there looking at this thing, I realized with absolute certainty that I was face to face with what could only be a Sasquatch. Right here on our farm, in New York. Not in Washington or Oregon, but here in our woods, at my special place. When that realization hit me, pure panic took over. I don't even remember consciously deciding to run. My body just reacted. I turned and bolted through the woods, crashing through underbrush, branches whipping my face and arms. I didn't care about the noise I was making or the scratches I was getting. All I knew was that I needed to get as far away from that thing as possible. I hit the barbed wire fence that separates our woodlot from the meadow, and I swear I cleared all 4 strands in one leap. I've never jumped that high in my life, but fear gave me wings. I sprinted across the open field toward our farm buildings, probably covering that half-mile faster than I've ever run before. My lungs were burning, and my legs felt like rubber, but I didn't slow down until I reached the barn. I burst through the door and collapsed on a hay bale, gasping for breath. Dad was in there working on the tractor and looked at me like I'd lost my mind. I couldn't even speak for a few minutes, just sitting there trembling and trying to catch my breath. When I finally told him what I'd seen, he gave me that look parents give when they think you're either lying or exaggerating. He suggested it was probably just a black bear, though we rarely see them this far south. I tried to explain about the eyes, the swaying, the hair hanging over its face, but I could tell he wasn't taking me seriously. It was only after I'd calmed down a bit that I realized I'd lost my sweater somewhere during my panicked flight. It was my favorite, a blue wool one my grandmother had knitted for me last Christmas. Dad said if I was so sure it was just a bear, I should go back and get the sweater before it got dark. I didn't want to go, but I also didn't want to look like a coward, so I asked if I could take the shotgun with me. Dad raised his eyebrows but nodded. He probably thought having the gun would make me feel brave enough to admit I'd just seen a bear. I took the 12 gauge and headed back toward the woods, my heart pounding harder with each step. The sun was lower now, casting longer shadows across the meadow. Every few steps, I'd stop and scan the tree line, looking for any sign of movement. My mouth was dry and my hands were slick with sweat as I clutched the shotgun. When I reached the fence where I'd made my spectacular leap earlier, I started walking along it, looking for my sweater. That's when I heard it, footsteps in the woods, parallel to the fence line. Heavy, deliberate footsteps, moving along with me. And something else, the distinct sound of branches being broken. Not accidentally stepped on, but purposefully snapped. It was following me along the fence, just inside the tree line where I couldn't see it clearly. I froze, raising the shotgun, my finger trembling near the trigger. The footsteps stopped too. "Hello?" I called out, immediately regretting breaking the silence. My voice sounded thin and scared, even to my own ears. No response, just more branch breaking. Then I realized what was happening. It was warning me. It was deliberately making noise, letting me know it was there, telling me to keep my distance. The thought sent a fresh wave of chills down my spine. I was about to turn and run again when I spotted my sweater. It was draped neatly over the top strand of the barbed wire fence, not caught or tangled as if it had fallen off during my frantic escape, but carefully placed there, folded over the wire. I stared at it in disbelief. I had definitely been wearing it when I ran into the woods earlier. I had no memory of taking it off or losing it near the fence. The only explanation was that the creature had found it, picked it up, and placed it there for me to find. That realization made my knees go weak. This thing, this Sasquatch, had enough intelligence to understand that the sweater belonged to me and that I might come back for it. It had enough awareness to place it somewhere I would see it, somewhere I could easily retrieve it without having to enter the woods again. As I stood there processing this, I heard another branch snap, closer this time. Whatever was in there was moving toward me. I didn't hesitate. I snatched the sweater off the fence with one hand, keeping the shotgun ready with the other, and backed away slowly toward the open meadow. Once I was about 20 yards from the tree line, I turned and ran again, not stopping until I reached the safety of our farmhouse. I burst through the kitchen door, startling my mother, who was preparing dinner. One look at my face told her something was seriously wrong. I still had the shotgun in one hand and my sweater in the other. "Lucas, what on earth?" she said, taking the gun from me and setting it aside. I told them everything over dinner, about the black figure, the yellow eyes, the hair hanging over its face, the branch breaking, and especially about finding my sweater draped over the fence. Mum looked concerned, but Dad still seemed skeptical, suggesting again it was probably just a bear. But I know what I saw. It wasn't a bear. Bears don't place sweaters on fences. After thinking about it for days now, I believe what I encountered was a juvenile male Sasquatch. It was drinking at the spring when I surprised it. The hair hanging over its face might be a characteristic of the eastern variant, what some folks call the Ohio woolly booger. I've been reading everything I can find about Bigfoot sightings in the eastern United States, and there are reports of similar creatures, though they're much rarer than the Pacific Northwest sightings. I haven't gone back to my campsite yet. I'm not sure I ever will. That spot by the spring doesn't feel like mine anymore. But I find myself looking toward the woods every day, wondering if it's still out there, wondering if it's watching our farm from the cover of the trees. The most unsettling part is that I'm not sure if I was more frightened of it or if it was more frightened of me. The way it swayed there, staring at me with those yellow eyes through the curtain of hair, it seemed just as surprised to see me as I was to see it. And the fact that it returned my sweater instead of destroying it suggests it might not have meant any harm. I still haven't told anyone outside my family. Who would believe me? But I know what I saw, and I know it wasn't anything natural or normal. I just needed to tell someone who might understand. Has anyone else seen something like this in the New York State area? I can't be the only one, can I? I keep that sweater folded in my drawer now. Sometimes I take it out and look at it, half expecting to find black hairs caught in the wool or some other evidence. There's nothing there, of course. Nothing except the memory of those yellow eyes staring at me through a curtain of dark hair, and the knowledge that something unexplainable is living in our woods. Story 10. I still can't shake what happened to us at Yosemite in September of '76. I've spent decades trying to rationalize it, but I can't. I don't talk about it much because people either think I'm making it up or they start with all that Bigfoot hunter nonsense. I'm not a Bigfoot hunter. I'm just someone who experienced something I still can't explain. There were 5 of us on that trip. Me, my brother Eric, and our 3 friends from college, Dave, Mike, and Steph. We were all in our 20s, had decent camping experience, and weren't the type to spook easily. We'd planned this trip for months, wanting to catch Yosemite before the weather turned. We arrived at the campground near the lake in the early afternoon. It was a beautiful September day, warm enough to be comfortable, but with that hint of fall crispness in the air. The campground was pretty full, typical for that time of year. There were families, couples, solo hikers, normal crowd. We found our spot and set up our 3 tents, one for Steph, one for me and Eric, and one for Dave and Mike. That day was perfect. We hiked one of the trails, took some photos with Eric's new camera, cooked hot dogs and beans over our fire, and just enjoyed being away from school and responsibilities. As the sun started setting, more people gathered around their campfires. Kids were roasting marshmallows. Someone a few sites over was quietly playing guitar, and we could hear laughter from different directions. It felt safe, communal. By around 10 o'clock, things started quieting down as people headed to their tents. We stayed up a bit later, finishing our beers and planning the next day's hike. It must have been close to 11:30 when we finally crawled into our sleeping bags. I remember checking my watch and thinking we should get up early to make the most of the day. I don't know exactly what time it was when I first noticed something was off. I just remember waking up suddenly, feeling alert. Not scared yet, just aware. At first, I couldn't figure out what had disturbed me. The campground was quiet, which made sense since it was the middle of the night. But then it hit me. It wasn't just people quiet. It was everything quiet. If you've spent any time camping, you know there's never true silence in nature, especially near water. There's always something: crickets, frogs, the rustling of nocturnal animals, wind in the trees, something. But there was absolutely nothing, just a dead, suffocating silence that felt physical, like pressure against my ears. I propped myself up on my elbow and listened harder, thinking maybe I was still half asleep. Eric stirred beside me. "You hear that?" he whispered. "I don't hear anything," I whispered back. "That's the problem." He sat up too. "Yeah, exactly. It's too quiet." We sat there for maybe a minute, just listening to nothing. I was about to lie back down, telling myself I was being ridiculous when it happened. The sound started low, almost at the edge of hearing, a deep, rumbling vocalization that didn't sound like any animal I'd ever heard. It wasn't a growl exactly, and it wasn't a roar. It was purposeful, like it was trying to communicate something. Then it changed. The sound rose in pitch, getting louder, more urgent, like something between a scream and a howl, but with an almost human quality that made my skin crawl. It lasted maybe 15 seconds total, ending in a high-pitched, abrupt shriek that cut off suddenly. By this point, Eric and I were both sitting straight up, completely rigid. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. What the hell was that? Eric's voice was barely audible. Before I could answer, we heard movement outside, the zipper of another tent, then another. Voices, urgent, frightened voices. We scrambled for our flashlights and shoes. I remember my hands were shaking so badly I could barely tie my laces. We unzipped our tent and crawled out just as Dave and Mike emerged from theirs. Steph was already standing outside her tent, flashlight beam darting nervously around the campsite. What I saw around us made my blood run cold. In the dim light of the quarter moon and scattered flashlight beams, I could make out people. Lots of people moving rapidly around their campsites, not leisurely midnight bathroom trips. These people were packing up, grabbing whatever they could, throwing things into cars, corralling sleepy kids. They were fleeing. "Hey!" Dave called out to a guy who was hurriedly stuffing a sleeping bag into his trunk. "What's going on?" The man looked over at us, his face pale in the beam of Dave's flashlight. "You didn't see it? It ran right past your campsite, man." "See what?" Mike asked, but the guy just slammed his trunk and jumped into his car. A woman hurrying past with a small child in her arms overheard us. "There's something out there," she said, her voice shaking. "Something big. We're not staying to find out what." More cars were starting now, headlights cutting through the darkness as they pulled away. I looked around and realized at least half the campground was packing up. "Should we go too?" Steph asked, hugging herself against the night chill, or maybe against fear. I wasn't sure what to say. Part of me wanted to throw everything in the car and get the hell out of there. But another part, the logical part, was trying to make sense of what was happening. That's when the smell hit me. I'll never forget it as long as I live. It was like a dog that had been swimming in stagnant water and then rolled in something dead, musty, wild, but with this undertone of decay that made my stomach turn. And it was strong. Not like it was coming from a distance, but like whatever made that smell had passed right through our campsite. "Do you smell that?" I asked. Everyone nodded. "It came from over there," Mike said, pointing his flashlight toward the trees at the edge of our site. "I think I heard something moving just before you guys came out." We all turned our lights in that direction, but there was nothing to see except trees and underbrush. The beam of my flashlight caught something odd on the ground, though. I moved closer, and the others followed. There, clearly visible in the soft dirt at the edge of our campsite, was a footprint, but not a human footprint, and not like any animal track I'd ever seen. It was huge, easily 15 inches long, and shaped somewhat like a human foot, but wider, with what looked like 5 toes. The impression was deep, suggesting whatever made it was heavy. That's not possible," Eric said, staring at it. "What could make a print like that?" Before anyone could answer, we heard the sound again, that same deep vocalization rising to a scream, but farther away this time, maybe from across the lake. It echoed off the mountains, making it hard to pinpoint exactly where it was coming from. More cars started up around us. A park ranger's vehicle drove slowly through the campground, the ranger using a megaphone to tell everyone to stay calm and stay in their campsites. But it was too late for that. People were already in full panic mode. I remember a family with 3 small children trying to take down their tent with just flashlights to see by, the kids crying, the parents arguing about whether to just leave the tent behind. An older couple had already packed their car, but were frantically searching for their dog, who had apparently run off when the commotion started. "We should help them," Steph said, moving toward the couple. I was about to follow when I felt, I don't know how to describe it exactly, a presence, like when you know someone's watching you even though you can't see them. I turned slowly toward the tree line again, raising my flashlight. For just a split second, I thought I saw movement. Something large shifting between two trees, maybe 30 yards away. I blinked, and it was gone. But the image is seared into my brain. A dark, massive shape, too big to be a person, moving with purpose. "Guys," I said, my voice catching, "I think there's something in the trees." We all trained our lights in that direction, but whatever I'd seen, if I'd seen anything at all, was gone now. The ranger's vehicle pulled up near us. "Folks, everything's under control," he said, but I could hear the tension in his voice. "We've had reports of a large animal in the area, probably a bear. Please return to your tents or vehicles and stay there until morning." "A bear doesn't make sounds like that," Dave said after the ranger drove off, "and it doesn't leave footprints like this." We debated what to do. Half the campground had already cleared out, and more were leaving by the minute. In the end, we decided to stay, partly because we were too freaked out to pack up in the dark, and partly because, well, we were young and stupid. Plus, the ranger had said to stay put. None of us went back to sleep. We built up our fire again and sat around it, jumping at every sound. The campground gradually emptied until there were only a few sites still occupied besides ours. The night seemed to stretch on forever. We heard the scream 2 more times before dawn, each time more distant than the last. The strange silence remained. No crickets, no frogs, nothing. Just occasional human noises from the few remaining campers, all of us waiting for morning. When the sky finally began to lighten, I felt relief wash over me like a physical sensation. We were exhausted, running on adrenaline and fear, but we'd made it through the night. As soon as it was light enough, we packed up and left. We didn't even make coffee or breakfast, just threw everything in the car and got out of there. The campground was a ghost town, abandoned tents and gear everywhere, like people had fled a disaster zone. For years after, I didn't connect what happened to any of the Bigfoot stories. I just filed it away as some weird, unexplainable night. Then in the early 90s, I was watching some nature show about unexplained phenomena, and they played an audio recording of what they claimed was a Bigfoot vocalization. I dropped the glass I was holding. It was the sound, the exact sound we'd heard that night, though the one at Yosemite had ended with that higher, more abrupt pitch that still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. I've looked for reports about that night, thinking surely with so many witnesses, someone must have written about it officially. But I've never found anything, just occasional online posts from people who claim they were there or knew someone who was. I don't know what we experienced that night. I just know that whatever it was terrified an entire campground of people so badly that they fled in the middle of the night, leaving behind thousands of dollars worth of camping equipment. And I know that for months afterward, I couldn't sleep without checking that my doors and windows were locked, despite living in a 3rd-floor apartment in the city. I haven't been camping since. Story 11. I still can't believe it's been almost 17 years since it happened. I don't talk about it much because people either think I'm crazy or they start suggesting mundane explanations that I've already considered 1,000 times. But I need to get this off my chest, and maybe someone here has experienced something similar. I was living in a small mobile home park in western Pennsylvania back in 2006. It wasn't fancy, but it was affordable and quiet. My place sat at the edge of the community, with nothing but dense woods behind it stretching for miles. I loved that location because it felt private, and my dog, Charlie, had plenty of space to run around when I took him out. Charlie was a medium-sized mutt, some kind of beagle shepherd mix. He was about 5 years old at the time and pretty brave. He'd chase squirrels, bark at passing trucks, typical dog stuff. Nothing really scared him except thunderstorms. It was July 26th, a Wednesday night. I remember because I had just gotten home from my evening shift at the hospital where I worked as a nurse's aide. It was hot and muggy, typical Pennsylvania summer weather, My air conditioner was struggling to keep up, making this constant droning noise that was driving me nuts. Around midnight, Charlie started doing his little dance by the door, his signal that he needed to go out. I was exhausted from my shift, but got up from the couch where I'd been half watching some reality TV show. I slipped on my flip-flops, grabbed Charlie's leash, though I rarely attached it that late at night, and stepped outside. The night was weirdly still. Usually you'd hear crickets, maybe an occasional car on the main road about half a mile away, or the low mumble of someone's TV through an open window. But that night, it was just quiet. The kind of quiet that makes the hair on your arms stand up because it feels unnatural. I stood on my small deck while Charlie sniffed around the patchy grass. The security light on the corner of my home cast this yellowish glow that only reached about 15 feet out before the darkness of the woods took over. I remember staring into that blackness, feeling unusually uneasy. Charlie was taking his sweet time, investigating every blade of grass like it was the most interesting thing in the world. I was about to call him back when it happened. This sound came from the woods. A howl, but not like anything I'd ever heard before. I grew up in rural areas. I know what coyotes sound like. I know what wolves sound like from nature documentaries. I know what dogs sound like when they howl at sirens. This wasn't any of those. It started low, almost like a moan, then rose in pitch until it became this powerful, resonant call that seemed to fill the entire valley. Then it dropped again, creating this eerie pattern that repeated a few times. The sound had this quality to it, like it was coming from something with a massive chest cavity, something big. The instant it started, my entire body went cold. I'm not exaggerating when I say I felt pure primal fear wash over me. My skin prickled and my mouth went dry. I couldn't move for what felt like forever, but was probably just a few seconds. Charlie froze too. He was about 10 feet away from me, and he just stopped. His entire body went rigid, his ears perked forward toward the woods. He didn't bark or growl, he just stood there completely still, staring into the darkness. That scared me more than anything because Charlie always reacted to strange noises. Always. The howl lasted maybe 15 seconds, then stopped. For a moment, there was this terrible silence again. Then it started a second time, louder and somehow more deliberate, like whatever was making it had moved closer to the edge of the trees. That's when I snapped out of my paralysis. I rushed forward, scooped Charlie up, all 45 pounds of him, and practically ran back to my door. Charlie didn't struggle or bark. He just trembled against my chest. My hands were shaking so badly, I fumbled with the doorknob. Once inside, I slammed the door shut, locked the deadbolt, and even shoved a chair under the handle, something I'd never done before. I pulled all the blinds down and turned off most of the lights, leaving just the small lamp in the hallway on. I don't even know why I did that, like I was hiding. The howling continued for maybe another 2 or 3 minutes. Standing in my living room, clutching Charlie, who was still shaking, I could hear it clearly through the walls of my home. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The silence lasted maybe 30 seconds before every dog in the neighborhood erupted into barking. It was chaos, like someone had flipped a switch, and every canine within earshot was losing their mind at the same time. That lasted for a good 10 minutes before gradually dying down. Charlie wouldn't leave my side that night. He kept staring at the windows, his ears twitching at every sound. I ended up sleeping on the couch with him curled against me, a baseball bat on the floor beside us. Yeah, I know how that sounds, but I was terrified. I barely slept. Every creak of the house settling made me jolt awake. Around 4 in the morning, I heard something moving around outside. Heavy footsteps that seemed to circle my home once before heading back toward the woods. I was too scared to look. The next morning, I was a mess. I called in sick to work, something I rarely did. Around 10, I finally worked up the courage to peek outside. Everything looked normal. Birds chirping, squirrels running around, the usual morning stuff. But I couldn't shake this feeling of being watched. Later that afternoon, I saw my neighbor Tom outside checking his mail. Tom was in his 60s, had lived in the park for decades, and was the neighborhood handyman. I walked over, trying to seem casual, and asked if he'd heard anything strange the night before. His reaction was odd. He got this look on his face, kind of a mixture of recognition and discomfort. He nodded and said, "Yeah, heard something around midnight. Woke me up." But when I tried to get him to describe what he'd heard, he just shrugged and said, "Just some animal probably. Woods are full of them." Then he changed the subject, asked about my car that had been making a weird noise the week before. But there was something in his eyes, like he knew exactly what I was talking about, but didn't want to discuss it. That bothered me more than if he'd just said he hadn't heard anything. Over the next few days, I started researching online. I looked up animal sounds, played recordings of coyotes, wolves, bears, even mountain lions, though they're not supposed to be in our area. Nothing matched what I'd heard. Then I stumbled across a website about Bigfoot encounters. I'd never given much thought to Bigfoot before. It seemed like a silly legend, something for TV shows and tabloids. But as I read through the accounts, I noticed a pattern. Many encounters began with strange vocalizations or howls, often described as sounding almost human but not quite, or having an unusual quality that triggered immediate fear in people who heard it. One account in particular gave me chills. A forest ranger in Washington state described hearing a howl that started low, rose to a powerful peak, then fell again in a mournful pattern. He said it was so loud it seemed to vibrate the windows of his cabin, and that the local wildlife went completely silent before and after. That description matched almost exactly what I'd heard. I kept reading more accounts, finding more similarities. Many mentioned how their dogs reacted, either becoming unnaturally still and silent, or absolutely terrified. Many described the feeling of being watched in the days following the incident, and many mentioned that other local residents seemed reluctant to discuss their own experiences, even when they'd clearly heard or seen something too. Since that night, I've moved away from that mobile home park, not just because of what happened. I got a better job in another city about a year later, but I won't pretend I wasn't relieved to leave. Charlie stayed anxious about going outside at night for months afterward. He'd freeze at the door, scanning the tree line before reluctantly doing his business and rushing back. I never heard that sound again, but sometimes, especially on quiet nights, I remember it perfectly, the way it seemed to reach inside me and trigger some ancient warning system, the way it filled the air and seemed to come from something massive, the way it made me instantly completely certain that whatever made it wasn't something I wanted to see. I still don't know for sure what was in those woods that night, but I know what I heard wasn't a known animal, and whatever it was intelligent enough to silence every natural sound in the area before it called out, like it wanted to make sure it was heard clearly, like it was announcing its presence. To this day, I can't explain it. But I know what I heard, and I know what I felt. There was something in those woods that night, something that shouldn't exist according to science. And sometimes I wonder if it's still there, watching the edge of that mobile home park, waiting for someone else to step outside at midnight. Story 12. I've never told this story online before. Hell, I barely tell it in person. But I can't sleep tonight, and maybe putting this down will help somehow. It was the summer of 1960. I had just turned 17, and me and my buddies Mike and Jason were bored out of our minds in Huntsville. If you've never been to East Texas in the summer, let me tell you, the air is so thick with humidity you can practically swim through it, and there's nothing for teenagers to do except get into trouble. That particular weekend, Jason's cousin had offered us the use of his hunting cabin out in the piney woods. It wasn't anything fancy, just a small wooden structure with a couple of rooms, a kitchenette, and an outhouse out back. but it was somewhere different to hang out, away from our parents and the local sheriff who seemed to have it in for us. The cabin was pretty remote. We drove Jason's beat-up Chevy down these winding country roads until we couldn't drive any further. We had to park on this dirt road and hike the rest of the way, about 3/4 of a mile through dense woods. I remember complaining about it, but Jason kept saying it would be worth it. We could drink the beers we'd stolen from his dad's fridge without anyone catching us. We got to the cabin just as the sun was starting to set. The woods were getting dark fast, and the pines were making these long shadows across the ground. Mike fumbled with the key for a minute before we finally got inside. It was musty as hell. Clearly no one had been there in months. Jason found the light switch, and a single bulb hanging from the ceiling flickered on, casting this yellow glow around the place. It wasn't much, but it felt like freedom to us. We cracked open the beers and started playing cards at this rickety old table. Jason's cousin had left some canned food in the cabinets, so we heated up some beans and ate them straight from the can. We were laughing, talking about girls from school, and making these big plans about what we'd do after graduation. Normal kid stuff. About an hour later, that's when things started feeling off. I was in the middle of telling a story when I noticed Mike kept glancing toward the window. When I asked him what was up, he just shrugged and said he thought he saw something move outside. We laughed it off, probably just raccoons or possums, we figured. But then we all heard it, this soft scraping sound coming from the kitchen window. "It's probably Bobby and them trying to scare us," Jason said. "Bobby Williams and his friends were always trying to pull pranks on us. It made sense they might have followed us out here." "Let's turn off the lights and sneak outside," Mike suggested. "Catch them in the act." So that's what we did. Jason hit the lights, and we waited in the darkness for our eyes to adjust. The cabin had these thin curtains that let in just enough moonlight to see each other's silhouettes. We grabbed our flashlights but kept them off so we wouldn't give ourselves away. We crept to the back door, eased it open without making a sound, and slipped outside. The night air was thick with mosquitoes and that pine smell that's everywhere in those woods. We split up to circle the cabin. Mike went left, Jason right, and I took the back side near the kitchen window where we'd heard the noise. I still remember how the pine needles felt under my feet as I tried to step quietly. The moon was nearly full that night, so I could see well enough without my flashlight. As I rounded the corner of the cabin, I froze. There, standing in front of the open refrigerator door, was something. The kitchen window was open, and through it I could see this figure. It was tall, taller than any man I'd ever seen, and standing there in the glow of the refrigerator light. And it was drinking from a ketchup bottle, just tilting its head back and squeezing ketchup into what I assumed was its mouth. I couldn't make out details, just a silhouette. But it was covered in what looked like hair, long, dark hair, hanging maybe 4 to 6 inches from its body. Not clothing, hair. I couldn't see its face at all. The hair seemed to cover everything. For what felt like forever, I just stood there, unable to move. My heart was pounding so hard, I was sure the thing would hear it. Then Jason's voice cut through the night. "The hermit! Let's get out of here!" That broke the spell. The figure in the kitchen jerked toward the sound, and I saw it move with this unnatural quickness. I didn't wait to see what happened next. Pure instinct took over, and I ran. We all did, scattering in different directions. I don't know why I didn't follow Mike and Jason. Some primal part of my brain just said run, and I took off into the woods, away from the road, away from our car. I was the fastest runner on the track team, and in that moment I was grateful for every lap I'd ever run. The woods were dark, branches whipping at my face as I tore through the underbrush. I had no idea where I was going, just away. My lungs were burning, and I could hear my pulse throbbing in my ears. That's when I realized I could hear something else too. Something behind me. It was moving through the woods faster than me, much faster, breaking branches, rustling leaves, not even trying to be quiet, just coming and gaining. I pushed myself harder, but I could tell whatever was chasing me was closing the distance. The sound was getting closer, and then came the smell. God, that smell. I've worked in slaughterhouses since then. I've smelled roadkill in the summer heat. I've emptied septic tanks. Nothing comes close to that stench. It was like rotting meat and skunk spray, and something else I can't even describe. Something not right. Not natural. The smell got stronger as it got closer, until I was gagging as I ran. I could hear its breathing now, these heavy, wet sounds. Not human breathing, not animal breathing either. Something different. I was sure I was going to die. I had this absolute certainty that when this thing caught me, that would be it. No one would ever find me, or if they did, they wouldn't recognize what was left. I don't know how long I ran. Time got weird. It could have been minutes or hours. My legs were numb, my chest was on fire, and I kept running into trees and bushes because I couldn't see where I was going. And then, somehow, I stumbled onto the dirt road where we'd parked. I don't know how I found it. Blind luck or some subconscious sense of direction. Jason's car was there, and Mike and Jason were inside, both white as sheets. They'd made it back before me. I practically dove through the window into the back seat, screaming at Jason to drive. He didn't need to be told twice. The tires spun in the dirt as he floored it, and we tore down that road like the devil himself was after us. None of us spoke for a long time. When we finally did start talking, our voices were shaky. Mike had a cut on his forehead from running into a branch. Jason had lost a shoe somewhere. We were all covered in scratches and dirt. "What the hell was that?" Mike finally asked. "The hermit," Jason said. "My cousin always said there was some kind of hermit living in those woods, said the family's known about him for years." "That wasn't a hermit," I said. I couldn't stop shaking. That wasn't a person. We argued about it all the way back to town. Jason insisted it was just some crazy man living in the woods. Mike thought maybe it was someone in a costume trying to scare us. I knew better. What I'd seen, what had chased me, wasn't human. We never reported it. Who would believe us? 3 teenagers who'd been drinking beer in the woods, claiming to have seen some kind of monster. We'd have been laughed out of town. For years afterward, I told myself maybe they were right. Maybe it was just a hermit, some poor, mentally ill person living off the grid. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The thing is, looking back on it now, I don't think it was chasing me to hurt me. I think it was just as scared as I was. We had invaded its territory, and it was running away too. It just happened to be running in the same direction as me. At least, that's what I tell myself to sleep at night, and I've had this feeling ever since that what we saw wasn't an adult. Something about the way it moved. It felt younger somehow. Not a child exactly, but not fully grown. I can't explain how I know this. It's just a feeling I've carried all these years. I never went back to those woods, never wanted to. I left Huntsville as soon as I graduated and only go back for funerals. Mike and Jason still live there, and sometimes when we get together, after a few drinks, one of them will bring it up. "Remember that night at the cabin?" And we'll all go quiet for a while. It's been over 60 years now, but I still wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, heart racing, that smell in my nostrils, the memory of those footsteps gaining on me in the dark, the sound of that breathing. I've never seen anything like it since, never want to, but I know what I saw. I know what chased me through those woods, and it wasn't human. You can believe me or not, doesn't matter to me, but if you're ever driving those back roads near the piney woods outside of Huntsville and you see a cabin through the trees, keep driving. Some places aren't meant for us. Some things should be left alone. I still can't explain what happened that night. Sometimes I wonder if that thing is still out there, drinking ketchup from refrigerators and running through the pines. I hope I never find out. Story 13. I still kick myself every time I think about driving away. 2 years later, and I'm still obsessing over what I saw that day. rewinding it in my mind and trying to convince myself that I wasn't hallucinating. I wasn't drunk or high. I don't do drugs, and I hadn't even had my morning coffee yet. What I saw was real, and I know it sounds crazy, but I need to get this off my chest. I'm a wildlife photographer based out of Kamloops. Nothing fancy. I sell some prints online and to local shops. Do the occasional magazine gig, but mostly it's a passionate side hustle while I work my regular job. That morning in early October, I had a rare weekday off and decided to head up BC Highway 5 toward Little Fort to catch the autumn colors along the North Thompson River. The forecast called for clear skies, perfect light for landscape shots. I left around 6 in the morning, well before sunrise. The plan was to catch first light at this particular bend in the river I'd scouted on Google Maps. It's about 20 minutes north of Little Fort, where a smaller creek feeds into the Thompson. I'd never shot there before, but thought it might make for some nice compositions with the water and the hillsides. The drive was uneventful, almost no traffic that early, just me and my thoughts and a thermos of tea. I remember the morning was crisp, frost on the roadside grass catching the headlights. Fall comes early in that part of BC. I'd been driving for about 25 minutes past Little Fort when I first noticed something odd across the river. The sun was just beginning to illuminate the valley, that soft golden light photographers dream about. The highway runs along the east side of the North Thompson, and I was looking west across the water when I spotted movement. At first, I thought it was a moose, or maybe an elk at the river's edge. But something about the way it moved didn't seem right. I slowed down, trying to get a better look while still watching the road. There was a small turnout ahead, so I pulled in, grabbed my binoculars from the passenger seat, and stepped out of the truck. The air was dead still, cold enough to see my breath. No wind, just the distant sound of the river and the occasional vehicle passing on the highway behind me. I raised the binoculars, and that's when I got my first real look at whatever it was. Across the river, maybe 150 yards away, was a figure. Not an animal, at least not any animal I recognized, and definitely not a human. It was tall, much taller than a person, probably 7 feet at minimum. The entire body was covered in what looked like short, dense fur or hair, a uniform slate gray color that reminded me of storm clouds. The only variation I could see was that its face and what I'd call hands were slightly lighter in color. The thing that struck me immediately was how it moved. It was bent over at the water's edge, repeatedly dipping down and then straightening up. But the way it bent wasn't human. You know how when we bend over, we arch our backs or bend our knees? This thing hinged perfectly at the hips, keeping its back completely straight, almost like a mechanical movement. Fluid, but precise. Through the binoculars, I could see it was picking up something from the water, rocks or objects, examining them briefly, then tossing them aside before reaching for another. It was methodical, almost like it was searching for something specific. I lowered the binoculars and grabbed my camera from the truck. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely attach the telephoto lens. I kept thinking, this is it. This is the shot that'll change my life. I've photographed plenty of wildlife, bears, moose, wolves, but this was something entirely different. When I looked back up, preparing to start shooting, it suddenly stopped what it was doing and straightened to its full height. Even from that distance, I could tell it was massive, not just tall, but proportionally long in the torso, with arms that hung down almost to its knees. And then, in a moment I'll never forget, it turned its head and looked directly at me. I froze. The camera halfway to my face, forgotten. It was looking right at me, and I was looking at it. And in that moment, there was recognition. Not recognition like it knew me personally, but an acknowledgement, an awareness. I felt seen in a way I've never experienced before. It's hard to describe, but it was like making eye contact with something that understood exactly what I was, while I had no clue what it was. I couldn't see its eyes clearly from that distance, even through the lens, but I could feel them. That sounds crazy, I know, but it's the only way I can describe it. A heavy, intelligent gaze that pinned me in place. The strangest part, I wasn't afraid. I should have been terrified, alone on a deserted stretch of highway, staring at something that shouldn't exist. But instead, I felt a bizarre mix of awe, disbelief, and this overwhelming sense that I was witnessing something I wasn't supposed to see, like I'd accidentally stumbled upon a secret. The creature held my gaze for what felt like forever, but was probably only a few seconds. Then, as casually as someone returning to a task, it went back to whatever it was doing in the water. Bending, picking up, examining, discarding, over and over. I finally remembered my camera and started shooting. My hands were still shaking, and I cursed myself for not bringing a tripod. I took maybe 30 or 40 shots, adjusting settings between bursts, trying to get something, anything, clear enough to prove what I was seeing. For the next several minutes, I just stood there, alternating between watching through the binoculars and taking photos. The creature never acknowledged me again. It just continued its strange search in the shallows where the creek met the river. And this is the part I still can't explain, the part that keeps me up at night. After watching for maybe 10 minutes total, I suddenly packed up my gear, got back in my truck, and drove away. I drove away. I had a once-in-a-lifetime encounter with something completely unexplainable, and I just left, before I got any definitive proof. I can't explain why I did that. It wasn't fear. I wasn't scared at all. It was almost like a fog came over my mind, and I suddenly felt an urgent need to leave, like I'd overstayed my welcome. The whole drive home, I kept asking myself, why did you leave? What the hell is wrong with you? When I got home, I immediately downloaded the photos. This is the second worst part of my story. Every single shot was unusable, severely underexposed, out of focus, or both. In my excitement and nervousness, I'd messed up the settings. The best image just shows a dark, blurry, vertical shape against the tree line. Nothing anyone would look at and see anything but a smudge. I've gone back to that exact spot 8 times since then. Same time of day, same season. Nothing, not even tracks or signs that something had been there. I've researched every known animal in British Columbia that might match what I saw. Nothing fits. I've read about Bigfoot and Sasquatch sightings, of course. Who hasn't? But what I saw doesn't match the descriptions. Every account I've read describes them as reddish-brown or black. This thing was uniformly grey, dark, stormy grey with those slightly lighter facial features and hands. And the movements, that strange mechanical bending that no human or ape could replicate. I've only told 3 people about this. My wife thinks I saw a bear standing upright, and my mind filled in the rest. My best friend seemed to believe me, but has stopped bringing it up. The third was a local indigenous elder I approached discreetly, wondering if there were stories about grey creatures in the Thompson River Valley. He listened patiently, but told me nothing. I find myself constantly replaying those moments in my head. The methodical searching behavior, the eye contact, the bizarre compulsion to leave. What was it looking for in the water? Why didn't it seem bothered by my presence? Why did I feel so strongly that I needed to go? Sometimes I wonder if there was something in its gaze that affected me, suggested to me that it was time to leave. That sounds ridiculous, I know, but nothing else explains why someone like me, someone who spent years waiting patiently in blinds for the perfect wildlife shot, would just pack up and leave during the most extraordinary encounter of my life. I'm not asking anyone to believe me. I'm not even sure what I believe anymore. All I know is that on a cold October morning 2 years ago, I stood across the North Thompson River from something that doesn't fit into any natural category I know of. Something intelligent enough to recognize what I was, something patient enough to allow me to watch it. and something strange enough that I still question my own memory of that day. The worst part is the not knowing. Not knowing what it was, not knowing if I'll ever see it again, not knowing why I left when I did, and knowing that even if I told everyone I know, I'll never be able to prove what happened. I still drive that stretch of Highway 5 whenever I can, camera ready, hoping for another chance. Sometimes I pull into that same turnout and just wait, watching the spot where the creek feeds into the river. Nothing yet, but I'll keep trying. Because whatever that gray figure was, it changed something in me, and I need to know if it was real. Story 14. I've been debating whether to post this for years. My friends and I still talk about it whenever we get together, but we've mostly kept it between ourselves. This happened back in September 2007, during our annual fishing trip to a remote lake between Perth and Westport in Ontario. It's a tradition we've had since college, though we're all getting older now. There were 5 of us that year. Me, Michael, Harry, the oldest at 60-something, Matt, Tom, and Dave. We rent the same cabin every year, this rustic place sitting about 50 yards from the lake with a small private dock. It's pretty isolated, which is exactly what we want. The nearest neighbor is maybe half a mile away, and there's dense forest surrounding most of the property except for a clearing between the cabin and the lake. That particular year was perfect weather-wise. Cool mornings, warm. Afternoons, no rain. We arrived on a Thursday afternoon, got everything set up, had some beers, and went to bed planning to start our annual fishing derby the next morning. What happened over the next 34 hours still gives me chills. I was up making coffee around 6 in the morning when Harry came bursting through the door. Now, Harry always takes these early morning walks. Guy's been doing it for decades, says it keeps his joints loose. He usually heads out around 5:30, walks the property perimeter, and comes back as everyone else is waking up. It's his routine. But this time was different. His face was pale, and he was breathing hard. I figured maybe he'd pushed himself too much or had some kind of health scare. "You okay?" I asked him. Yeah, he said, pouring himself a cup of coffee with slightly shaky hands. "Just walked a bit faster coming back." I didn't push it. Harry's stubborn, and I figured if something was wrong, he'd tell us when he was ready. We spent the day fishing, talking shit like we always do, drinking beer, and generally having a good time. Our annual fishing derby is just an excuse to get out on the water, really. We keep score, but nobody takes it too seriously. That night after dinner, I noticed Harry was quieter than usual. Normally he's full of stories, especially after a few drinks, but he seemed distracted, kept looking out the windows toward the lake. I asked him again if everything was okay, and he just nodded, said he was tired. The next day was Saturday, the main day of our derby. We split up into 2 boats, Harry and Dave in one, Matt, Tom, and me in the other. We fished most of the day, meeting up for lunch on this little island in the middle of the lake. By late afternoon, Matt and Tom wanted to try the inlet where the river feeds into the lake, so I dropped them off there while I went back to check on some lines we'd set up earlier. When I picked them up about an hour later, they were standing on the shore, looking spooked. They practically jumped into the boat. "What's up with you two?" I asked as we headed back toward the cabin. They exchanged this look, and Matt just shrugged. "Nothing. Just ready to head back." That evening after dinner, we were all sitting around the fire pit behind the cabin. The woods were maybe 30 yards behind us, the lake about 50 yards in front. It was that perfect time of night, not fully dark yet, but the sky was deepening to that navy blue color. We were all a few beers in, feeling good about the day's fishing. Tom suddenly said, "I need to tell you guys something weird." We all looked at him. Tom's usually the practical joker of the group, so I was expecting some punchline. "Matt and I saw something today by the inlet." Matt nodded, his expression serious. "Yeah, it wasn't a bear." "What do you mean?" Dave asked. Tom took a swig of his beer. We were fishing near where the river comes in. You know that little pebbly beach area on the southern shore? We all nodded. It's a good spot for walleye. Well, there was a canoe passing by. Couple of guys we didn't know, and we noticed something standing just behind the waterline on the opposite shore, watching the canoe go by. Standing? I asked. Yeah, standing upright, on two legs. Matt's voice was quiet. At first I thought it was just another fisherman, Tom continued, but it was big, really big, and dark-colored. I nudged Matt to look. Matt nodded. It was just watching, not moving. But when the canoe passed, it turned and walked into the trees, not like a person walks. It was fluid, fast, covered ground like it was nothing. How tall would you say? Dave asked, leaning forward. Hard to tell from across the inlet, but tall, much taller than a person. And the shoulders, the back was so broad. Tom made a gesture with his hands, indicating something with massive width. There was silence for a moment. Then Harry cleared his throat. I saw something yesterday morning, he said quietly. We all turned to look at him. During my walk, it was still dark out just before dawn. I was heading down toward the boathouse, and I saw movement near the dock. Thought maybe it was a deer or something coming for water. Harry took a deep breath. I shined my flashlight that way, and there was something crouched by the railing. It had a long arm reaching over like it was trying to grab something from the water. My skin prickled. The boathouse and dock were places we spent time every day. When my light hit it, it didn't run away like an animal would. It just shifted, stood up slowly and turned. Then it walked, not ran, across the clearing and into the trees on the other side. How big? I asked, my mouth suddenly dry. Based on the railing height, Harry paused. 8 feet, maybe more. And I'm not exaggerating. I've been trying to convince myself it was just a bear standing up, but bears don't move like that. It was deliberate. Why didn't you say anything? Dave asked. Harry shrugged. Would you have? I figured you'd all think I was seeing things. I'm the old man of the group, remember? Thought maybe my eyes were playing tricks in the dark. But what Matt and Tom saw, I started. Sounds like the same thing, Harry finished. Same movement, same size. We all sat there in silence, the fire crackling. The woods around us suddenly seemed darker, deeper. You're talking about a Sasquatch, Dave finally said, almost whispering the word. Nobody contradicted him. I've heard stories about this area, Tom said slowly. Never believed them, obviously, but locals have reported things. I looked around at my friends' faces, illuminated by the firelight. These were rational guys. Harry had been a high school principal before retiring. Matt was an accountant. Tom ran his own construction company. Dave was a dentist. Not exactly the type to make up fairy tales. Should we report it to someone? Matt asked. And say, what? Harry replied. That we saw something we can't identify? That we think Bigfoot is hanging around the lake? They'd laugh us out of town? He was right, of course. But sitting there with the woods closing in around us and night falling, I didn't feel like laughing at all. We stayed up late that night, talking in low voices, comparing details. The descriptions matched. A very large, upright figure that moved smoothly and deliberately. Not like a person stumbling through the woods, but like something that belonged there, moving with purpose. None of us slept well. I kept waking up, thinking I heard footsteps on the porch, or something moving around outside. At one point, around 3 in the morning, I could have sworn I heard wood creaking down by the dock. The next morning, we checked around the property. There were no obvious footprints, but the ground was pretty hard from lack of rain. Down by the dock, though, one of the fishing nets we'd left out to dry was missing. Could have blown into the water, I suppose, but there hadn't been much wind. We cut our trip short that day. Normally we'd stay through Sunday night, but by unspoken agreement, We packed up after breakfast and were on the road by noon. In the years since, I've gone back to that lake many times. I've set up trail cameras in the surrounding woods, hoping to catch something on film. So far, all I've captured is the usual wildlife: deer, raccoons, the occasional bear or coyote. Nothing 8 feet tall walking upright, but I still go back. Each year, I add more cameras, covering more ground. My wife thinks I'm obsessed, and maybe I am, but I know what my friends saw. I know Harry wouldn't make something like that up. I know the look on Matt and Tom's faces when they got back in the boat that day. That wasn't a joke or a story. That was genuine fear mixed with awe. Whatever it was intelligent enough to avoid people most of the time. It was watching us, studying us. It moved with intention. And for some reason, during those 34 hours in September 2007, it allowed itself to be seen. I don't know if I'll ever get proof. But every time I'm up at that lake now, especially in the early morning or at dusk, I feel eyes on me from the tree line. And sometimes, when I'm alone on the dock fishing, I could swear I hear heavy footsteps moving through the underbrush, circling, watching. I've never told this story publicly before. My friends and I still discuss it when we get together, but we've never shared it outside our circle. People would think we're crazy or attention-seeking. But I know what we experienced, and I know there's something out there in those woods that science hasn't classified yet. So if you're ever fishing that remote stretch between Perth and Westport, and you feel like you're being watched from the shore, you probably are. Story 15. I've never been much of a believer in the supernatural or cryptids or whatever you want to call them. I'm a pretty practical guy who works construction in Indianapolis, enjoys fishing on the weekends, and minds my own business. But something happened to me back in 2007 that I still can't explain. And honestly, I don't talk about it much because people think I'm crazy or making it up. But I swear on everything I care about, this happened exactly as I'm about to tell it. It was early June, and my buddy Dave and I decided to go camping and fishing at this secluded pond in southern Indiana. We'd been there a few times before. It's about 2 hours from the city, deep in the woods, and not many people know about it. It's perfect for bass fishing and just getting away from everything. The pond sits in this little valley with high walls on one side, almost like a cliff face, maybe 60 feet high. We usually took Dave's little aluminum boat across to the flat area at the bottom of this wall, because it was a perfect spot to set up camp. That Friday, we arrived around 3 in the afternoon. The weather was perfect, not too hot, clear skies, just a beautiful day to be outdoors. We loaded our gear into the boat, crossed the pond, and set up our tents about 15 feet from the water's edge. We spent the rest of the day fishing, caught some decent-sized bass, cooked them up on our little portable grill, had a few beers, and were in our separate tents by around 11 that night. I remember having trouble falling asleep because Dave was snoring like a chainsaw in his tent. But eventually, I drifted off. According to my watch, it was about 4 in the morning when I woke up to something I'll never forget as long as I live. At first, I thought it was just Dave moving around, but then I realized the sounds were coming from the direction of the cliff wall. Heavy footsteps, like someone really big walking down that nearly vertical wall. And I don't mean slipping or sliding down, I mean deliberate, controlled steps. The cliff was covered in loose rocks and dirt, with just a few small trees growing out of it. Even experienced climbers would have trouble navigating it in broad daylight, let alone in the dark. But whatever this was, moved down it like it was nothing. I froze in my sleeping bag, straining to listen. The footsteps got closer and closer to our campsite. Then they stopped, and I heard breathing. Not normal human breathing. This was deep, raspy, like something with lungs twice the size of a human's. It was standing right outside my tent, not more than a few feet away. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I had this sudden urge to clear my throat, pure nervous reaction. And I did, just a small ahem. What happened next made my blood run cold. The thing outside my tent perfectly mimicked the sound. Not like an echo, but like it was deliberately copying me, with the exact same pitch and everything. I don't know what possessed me, but I called out, "I have a gun." I don't own a gun, never have, but it was the only thing I could think to say. My voice was shaking so bad, I'm surprised I got the words out at all. The thing didn't respond, didn't run away, just stood there breathing. I looked over at Dave's tent, maybe 10 feet away from mine, and couldn't believe he was still asleep. I wasn't exactly whispering when I yelled about the gun, but Dave didn't stir at all. After what felt like forever, but was probably only a minute or two, I heard the footsteps move away from my tent toward the water's edge. Then I heard the strangest sound, like someone scooping up water with their hands and drinking it, but amplified. Slurping, sipping sounds that no animal I know makes. It went on for maybe 30 seconds. Then the footsteps came back toward my tent. It stopped again just outside. I was holding my breath, trying not to make a sound. I could hear it breathing, slower now, almost like it was listening. It stood there for what must have been 5 minutes, completely silent, except for that breathing. Then, suddenly, I heard it start to move away, back toward the cliff wall, and up it went. The footsteps faded as it climbed higher and higher until I couldn't hear them anymore. I didn't sleep another second that night. I just lay there, rigid with fear, waiting for dawn. When the first light finally came, I unzipped my tent and practically fell out. I was so desperate to get outside and see if there was any evidence of what had happened. Dave was already up, boiling water for coffee like nothing had happened. "Morning," he said, like it was just any other day. "Did you hear anything last night?" I asked him, my voice still shaky. "Nah, slept like a rock," he replied. "Why? What's up?" I didn't know how to explain it, so I just said, "I think something was in our camp last night, something big." Dave laughed it off. "Probably just a deer or something. They get curious." But I knew it wasn't a deer. No deer walks down a near vertical cliff in the dark. No deer mimics human throat clearing, and no deer drinks water with its hands. I walked down to the water's edge, looking for tracks, and that's when I saw them. In the soft mud by the reeds were footprints. Not deer tracks, not bear tracks, footprints. They were huge, at least 18 inches long, with 5 distinct toes. The stride length between them was enormous, easily 6 feet apart. Whatever made these was massive and walked on 2 legs. I called Dave over, and even he couldn't explain them away. "That's weird," was all he could say. We didn't talk much as we packed up camp. I wanted to get the hell out of there as fast as possible. For the next week or so, I couldn't stop thinking about what happened. I did some research online about similar encounters in southern Indiana and found a few stories that matched some elements of what I experienced. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call it. I'd always thought those stories were nonsense, but now I wasn't so sure. About 2 weeks later, Dave wanted to go fishing again. I was reluctant, but he suggested a different pond about 5 miles from the first one. I figured lightning wouldn't strike twice, so I agreed. This pond was smaller, more open, with a trail that ran around its perimeter. We arrived around noon, parked at the small gravel lot, and started walking the trail to find a good fishing spot. We'd gone maybe a quarter of the way around when I spotted something strange across the pond. Near the tree line, maybe 100 yards away, was what at first looked like a large tree stump, but something about it caught my eye. It was tall, maybe 10 feet high, and seemed oddly out of place. As I stared at it, trying to figure out what was bothering me about it, I realized with a shock that it had eyes, 2 dark spots that seemed to be watching us. "Dave," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "do you see that thing over there, by the trees?" He squinted across the water. "What, that dead tree? What about it?" "It's watching us," I said. Dave laughed. "Man, that last trip really got to you, huh? It's just a tree, Martin. Come on, let's keep going." I wasn't convinced, but I followed him. We found a spot on the opposite side of the pond from the stump and started fishing. For a while, everything was normal. We caught a few fish, talked about work and sports, and I almost forgot about the strange object I'd seen. Then, about 3 hours into our fishing, it hit us. The smell. It was like nothing I've ever experienced before or since. Imagine the worst wet dog smell you've ever encountered, mixed with rotting garbage and feces, so strong it made our eyes water. It came on suddenly, like walking into a wall of stench. "Jesus Christ," Dave gagged, covering his nose with his shirt. "What the hell is that?" I knew immediately. It was the same presence I'd felt that night by our tent. It had found us again. "We need to go," I said, already reeling in my line. "Now." For once, Dave didn't argue. We packed up our gear in record time and started hurrying back along the trail toward the car. As we passed the spot where I'd seen the stump earlier, I stopped dead in my tracks. It was gone. Completely gone. There was no stump, no tree, nothing tall enough to have been what I saw. "It was right here," I said, pointing to the empty space. "The thing I saw was right here." Dave looked uncomfortable for the first time. "Let's just get back to the car, okay?" We practically ran the rest of the way. As we drove off, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched from the woods, that the thing had been stalking us the entire time, circling around the pond as we fished, getting close enough for us to smell it before backing off. I've never gone back to either of those ponds, and I don't fish in southern Indiana anymore. Dave thinks I overreacted, that there are logical explanations for everything that happened. Maybe. There are. Maybe I imagined the eyes on the stump. Maybe the footprints were from some unusual but known animal. Maybe the thing that climbed down the cliff was just a very agile hiker. But deep down, I know what I experienced. I know what was watching us that day, what stood outside my tent breathing in the dark, what perfectly mimicked my throat clearing. It was something not supposed to exist, something most people will go their whole lives without encountering. I don't share this story often. Most people don't believe me, and I understand why. If someone had told me this story before it happened to me, I probably wouldn't have believed them either. But I know what I saw, what I heard, what I smelled, and sometimes late at night when I can't sleep, I still hear that deep, raspy breathing right outside my window, and I wonder if it followed me home. That's my story. Believe it or don't. But if you're ever camping in southern Indiana and you hear heavy footsteps in the middle of the night, or see what looks like a tall stump watching you from the tree line, or smell that unmistakable stench, don't stick around to investigate. Just pack up and leave, because some things in this world aren't meant to be understood, and some encounters you don't walk away from twice. Story 16. I've always felt safe in those woods. Our property has been in my family for 3 generations, and I've been hunting there since I was 12. 5 years of tracking deer, learning their habits, understanding the land. Last fall, during bow season, all that comfort vanished in an instant. It was late October, right at the peak of the rut. The weather had finally cooled down after an unusually warm autumn, and I'd been watching a decent 8-point buck for about 2 weeks. He was following the same pattern every evening, crossing through our pine stand around dusk. Perfect bow range. That evening, I got to my tree stand around 4:30, about 2 hours before sunset. The sky was clear, temperature in the low 50s, perfect hunting weather. I was using my favorite stand, the one my dad and I had set up years ago at the edge of a thick pine plantation. It's positioned so you can see down a 20-yard wide clearing that runs through the pines, like a natural game trail. I've taken 3 deer from that exact spot. I settled in and did what hunters do. I waited, silently, patiently. The woods were quiet that day, almost too quiet. No squirrels chattering, barely any birds. Looking back, that should have been my first warning. Around 6:15, the light was starting to fade. Not dark yet, but that golden gray time when shadows get longer and details start to blur. I was beginning to think my buck wasn't going to show when I heard movement in the pines, maybe 200 yards away on the west side of the clearing. My first thought was, finally. I carefully reached for my bow, which was hanging on a hook to my right. I nocked an arrow and waited, listening. Deer make a certain sound when they walk. Soft, cautious steps, occasional pauses. This wasn't that. Whatever was moving through those pines was heavier, breaking branches, pushing through undergrowth with force. Still, it could have been a big buck. During the rut, they get reckless, focused only on finding does. Then I heard it, 3 deep, powerful grunts, not in quick succession but spaced out. I've heard plenty of buck grunts before. This wasn't that. It was too deep, too guttural, too wrong. It reminded me of a bull elk, but we don't have elk in these parts. Not for 100 years at least. My mind raced, trying to explain it. Maybe a coyote with rabies. But I'd never heard a coyote make a sound like that. And coyotes don't typically make that much noise moving through the woods. The sound of breaking branches grew louder. Whatever it was getting closer to the clearing. And it was big. Big enough to snap branches that a deer would simply duck under. Something primal kicked in then. A deep instinct that bypassed all rational thought and whispered, "Don't move, don't even breathe too hard." I remained frozen, my bow forgotten in my hands. Something was very wrong, and my body knew it before my brain could catch up. I slowly, silently set my bow down and reached for the hunting knife on my belt. In that moment, I was thinking maybe a rabid animal, something I might need to defend myself against if it somehow detected me and climbed the tree. The footfalls got heavier, closer. They didn't sound like 4 legs anymore. They sounded like 2, heavy, deliberate steps. Then everything stopped. Complete silence fell over the woods for maybe 15 seconds. I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. That's when the scream came. I'll never forget that sound as long as I live. It started low, then rose to a pitch that didn't seem possible. It wasn't a mountain lion scream. We have those around here, and I know what they sound like. It was like someone had combined a bobcat scream with the shriek of a terrified child, but amplified it through something inhuman. It echoed through the trees and seemed to vibrate in my chest. Before the echo of that scream had even faded, it burst from the tree line. In the fading light, I couldn't make out details, but what I saw in that brief moment is burned into my memory. It crossed the 20-yard clearing in 3 strides. 3 strides, moving on 2 legs. It was massive, at least 7 feet tall, maybe more. Its movements were fluid and impossibly fast for something that size. The way it ran wasn't like a bear on its hind legs or a man in a suit. It was efficient, natural, like it had evolved to move exactly that way. The light was too dim to see its face or features clearly, but its silhouette was unmistakably not human. Too big, proportions all wrong. Long arms. But it wasn't a bear either. No bear moves like that. It disappeared into the pines on the other side of the clearing, still screaming as it crashed through the undergrowth. The sound gradually faded as it moved away, but I could track its progress by the noise of snapping branches and that awful piercing scream. I didn't think. I didn't wait. Pure adrenaline took over. I dropped my bow, left everything except my knife, and jumped straight down from my stand. It was about 12 feet up, and I landed hard, twisting my ankle. I barely felt it. I ran. I ran faster than I've ever run in my life. Forget the path. I crashed through the woods in a direct line toward our house, half a mile away. Branches whipped my face. I tripped twice over exposed roots and fallen logs, got up instantly both times, the pain not even registering. The whole time I ran, I could still hear that thing moving through the forest behind me, though the sound was growing more distant. Its screams had become intermittent, but each one sent a fresh wave of terror through me. Our closest neighbor, Mr. Jenkins, was outside his barn when I burst out of the tree line. He said I was white as a sheet, bleeding from scratches all over my face, and could barely speak. When I finally managed to tell him what happened, he looked skeptical, until we both heard it. That scream, distant now but still clear, echoed across the fields. Mr. Jenkins' expression changed immediately. We stood there listening as it screamed twice more, each time further away, moving north along the ridge that borders our properties. "In 36 years living here," he said quietly, "I ain't never heard anything like that." We could still hear branches breaking as it moved through the forest, though the sound was fading. Whatever it was covering ground fast. My parents didn't get home until around 9 that night. By then, the scratches on my face had stopped bleeding, and I'd had time to try to process what I'd seen. I told them everything. They didn't believe me, not really. Dad suggested it might have been a bear, though he couldn't explain the screaming. Mum thought I'd let my imagination run wild in the dark, maybe seen a deer and a coyote at the same time, and somehow combined them in my mind. I stopped trying to convince them after a while, but the next morning I went back with Dad to retrieve my bow and the rest of my gear. I noticed something he didn't: massive tracks crossing the clearing. They were partially obscured, pressed into fallen pine needles rather than soft mud, but they were there. About 16 inches long, with what looked like 5 toes. Not a bear, not a human, something else. I didn't point them out to him. I knew he wouldn't believe me anyway. It's been almost a year now. I haven't gone hunting alone since then. I've researched everything I could think of, known wildlife in our area, cryptid sightings, even local folklore. Nothing matches what I saw and heard that evening. Sometimes at night, when the wind is just right, I swear I can still hear that scream in the distance. It might be my imagination. I hope it's my imagination. But deep down, I know what I saw wasn't a deer or a coyote or even a bear. It was something much larger than any man, walking on 2 legs, crossing 20 yards of open ground in 3 strides, and capable of making a sound that still gives me nightmares. I don't tell this story to many people. Most wouldn't believe me anyway. But I know what I experienced was real, and I know that whatever it was is still out there, somewhere in those woods.